This podcast is brought to you on Roku and Fire TV by Pod Nation Podcast TV. Find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever podcasts are broadcast. Download our app and never miss a show with video on demand, as well as exclusive content found only on Pod Nation TV. Live from the KIJU studios in beautiful Ogasawara, this is the Monster Island Film Vault, episode 81, Godzilla -1 versus Jack GMan Hudgens. Hello, Kaiju Lovers, and welcome to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu. I am your host, Monster Island's film curator, Nate Marchand. Yes, I know, this is a bit of an impromptu episode, Jimmy, but I don't think anyone cares because we're talking about Godzilla. As I have said numerous times on this podcast, Godzilla is good for business. And, of course, it's about the new Godzilla -1, which, oh man, I don't want to telegraph it too much, but hoo boy. Hoo boy, people. Strap in, because you are about to hear, if I do say so myself, the best podcast episode on this film because of my guest here with me today, none other than everyone's favorite a-hole, Jack GMan Hudgens.
Thank you. Gosh, what a beautiful introduction. Thank you. I was really worried when, measure up to the standard of which I stand on, but I
don't worry. I'm sure Jimmy has a tape measure that we can use.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
I know.
That's wonderful.
Almost as fantastic as having you, and you brought your sister along with you today, yep. Rebecca, and we had a special screening over at the Denham Theater for -1. Yep. You're welcome. I managed to make some arrangements there for you. Mm-hmm. To my surprise, one of the last things Cameron Winter decided to do before he sold all of his shares back to the board was install a what's it called? A 4DX?
Yeah, 4DX.
Yeah, yes. Which the problem was you didn't warn your sister that's what we were doing.
Uh-huh. And so we're sitting here with you and me and my sister, and we actually had another guest on there. Dare I mention the rival of Kaiju Conversations?
Oh, yes.
But
screw that guy.
And so we're all sitting there. And I've never been 4DX either, and so things start shaking wildly, and those of you, I opted not to get popcorn because I knew this was going to happen, even though I had not been on one before.
I kept having flashbacks to all those comments that Martin Scorsese was saying about modern blockbusters and how they're roller coasters.
And honestly, I sat there thinking to myself, man, we're proving them right now. God, but. So we're flailing about. At this point, let's see, our ET at Kaiju Conversations.
I was surprised he didn't phone home at that point. Yeah,
right. He was smart enough to put the popcorn down before this thing activated. My dear sister, known for the drift space and her art.
Be nice. She's in the green room right now. Yeah, Jimmy's giving me the signal. She's like, she's in the green room, guys.
She, popcorn's going everywhere. It's re-popping itself. She's flailing around. Yep. And all I hear, then everything's silent. The seats stop. Everything's silent. You can hear a pin drop in the theater. And then all I hear is, Jack, I'm going to kill you.
Are you sure it wasn't GJ?
Jack, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And then she hands you the popcorn. Here, have it.
I was like, I don't want it anymore. I'm like, okay, free popcorn for me.
So,
quite possibly one of the best theater-going experiences I have ever had.
It was fun. I don't know how I feel about 4DX after my experience there. I don't know if I will opt to go there again immediately. It's not going to be my first choice, but I was glad I experienced it. I do think, however, this was the wrong movie to experience it in. Not that, when the seats moved, it wasn't, Yeah,
for those who don't know, we should explain. 4DX is something where I've been in something similar to this before, but it had actual 3D. They didn't do the actual 3D here with us, so we didn't have things popping out of the screen. But what it would do is the seats had mechanisms underneath them that say something explodes in the movie, it will rattle the seats around. They don't give you seatbelts. I'm surprised they don't have seatbelts.
Right.
And so they'll rattle you around. There are strobe lights that will flash, like say if there's gunfire or to go with the explosions. You know, and the weirdest one, and this was the one thing you had the option to turn off if you wanted to, was they would spray water mist at you. And you could hit a button to turn off, and they would fill in certain scenes, like if there was smoke or fog or something like that, it would I don't know what not smoke. Actual smoke.
So it's like a smoke machine.
It's like a smoke machine. It would put that in there, so it would get a little bit smoky in the theater, and you can actually see every single beam from the projector.
Yeah, that kind of annoyed me. I'll be honest, that kind of annoyed me. But the film, I think, doesn't entirely fit the mold for that because it's not exactly a nonstop action movie.
Right.
You know, I mean, those seats were very still.
Yes, they were
for a good portion of the film, and the smoke thing definitely took away from the movie for me. So I'm glad I actually saw it in IMAX first. Was the main thing. I'm glad I got experienced it like that, and I do intend to experience it a few more times before it leaves.
Oh yeah, I think that ET guy said something about seeing it. What was it, like 42, 97 times? I think his goal is to
more power to him.
Yeah, I think his goal is to single-handedly fund the sequel. I think he's hoping that will get the attention of the director, and he'll get to I don't know, like what's the lowest possible thing you could do on a movie set? You know, like the most basic thing you could do. Like maybe he just thinks he's just going to bring Takashi Yamazaki coffee every day or something like that. You know,
he's going to march down here and kick your. But yeah, no, I mean, I've seen it twice by now. You've seen it twice, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess we should dig into the experience, dig into the movie.
Yeah, we should. I was just about to mention that. We're doing this like a regular episode. We got a Toku topic and everything. Okay. I will admit, my initial Toku topic was based on my fan theories about what the movie was going to be about, and I quickly find out they're not true. I was wrong. Yes, I just admitted I was wrong. Red letter day for you, I know. But it was originally going to be, and I knew it was going to be potentially a touchy subject, the atomic bombings. Because I really thought those were going to factor into this movie quite a bit. They did not. In fact, they weren't even mentioned.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. But I went with a topic that ended up being a lot more fascinating than I thought initially, which was kamikaze pilots, which plays a massive role in this film. And I can't wait to share that research with all of you because, my gosh, it's quite interesting. But in the meantime, we got to do an entertaining info dump on this. So we'll be back here in, 10 minutes or so. Godzilla is an enraged and relentless force of nature. While his origins are shrouded in mystery, he is a dinosaurian creature from Odo Island mutated by the Operation Crossroads nuclear test. His motivation for attacking Japan is theorized to be territorial defense, but it is also implied he embodies vengeful war dead seeking retribution for their deaths. Koichi Shikishima is the ashamed but skillful failed kamikaze pilot dealing with PTSD from watching an entire garrison be killed by Godzilla when he had the chance to save them. After the war, he slowly tries to build a new life by caring for Noriko and Akiko, but after Noriko seemingly dies during Godzilla's attack, he's determined to avenge her with a suicide attack against the monster. The kind and hardworking Noriko Oishi is a young woman living on the streets of post-war Tokyo after adopting an orphan child. She hopes to survive as either a working woman or, preferably, as Koichi's wife, but in order to do that, she must help him overcome his trauma. Sumiko Ota is Koichi's angry but wise neighbor coping with the loss of her husband and 3 children during the war. She at first resents Koichi for not doing his job, but is later supportive of him and his found family. The innocent and loving Akiko is a war orphan given to Noriko by the child's dying parents and adopted by Koichi, serving as a key motivator for them both. Sosaku Tachibana is an intelligent and resourceful engineer who served with Koichi during the war and was the sole survivor of Godzilla's attack. While he resented Koichi for failing to act, he helps repair the Shinden plane and installs an ejection seat, advising Koichi to live. The brilliant and brave Kenji Doc Noda is a former military weapons engineer now working to dispose of mines in the Pacific. He befriends Koichi and helps him acclimate to civilian life. Shiro the Kid Mizushima is a determined and ambitious youth who wants to prove himself to everyone around him, even if they think he's quote-unquote useless. He's often berated for bemoaning that he was too young to fight in the war. The gung-ho and unruly Captain Yoji Akitsu is a former member of the Imperial Navy now leading the small crew of a ship disposing of mines, and he is no fan of the government. Like Kenji and Shiro, he adamantly works with his fellow former soldiers to defeat Godzilla. Much like a Showa-era Sekizawa script, the human and kaiju plotlines are separate yet parallel and often intersect with dramatic results. The kaiju story is fairly typical for Godzilla, but the human story is a poignant melodrama. By the end, they unify and resolve each other. Godzilla is the problem. Tachibana orders Koichi to shoot Proto-Godzilla with the 20mm guns on Koichi's airplane, but the pilot freezes up. While minesweeping, the crew of the Shinsei Maru discover an American warship destroyed by Godzilla, who pursues them. Koichi shoots him with a 15mm gun, which causes no harm, but then uses the gun to detonate a mine that floated inside Godzilla's mouth, but Godzilla regenerates from the damage. The heavy cruiser Takao arrives and bombards Godzilla with its cannons, but Godzilla destroys the vessel from underwater with his atomic ray. A blockade of mines is set up to keep Godzilla out of Japan, but he passes through them uninjured. Tanks shoot Godzilla during his attack on Ginza, but the kaiju decimates them with his atomic ray. Kenji concocts an elaborate plan to kill Godzilla, which is carried out by civilians who were former military. Koichi lures Godzilla into Sagami Bay with a Shinden aircraft, where 2 ships entangle him with cables holding Freon canisters that drag the kaiju 1,500 meters underwater to kill him with water pressure. When this fails, they enact Plan B, inflating balloons to float him to the surface to kill him with explosive decompression. However, Godzilla chews his way out of the balloons. The 2 ships, with some last-second help from a fleet of tugboats led by Shiro, manage to pull Godzilla to the surface, but not enough damage is inflicted to kill him, and so he charges his atomic ray to destroy them. The problem is solved when, having learned Godzilla is vulnerable on the inside, Koichi flies his explosive-laden Shinden plane into Godzilla's mouth as he charges his atomic ray, blowing up Godzilla's head. Thankfully, he ejected at the last second as Godzilla's corpse sinks into the water. The script by director Takashi Yamazaki is a simple narrative with 2 parallel storylines filled with rich themes and a handful of characters, although it is focused on Koichi as the primary protagonist. The special effects by Shirogumi, created at their studio in Chofu, were directed by the award-winning Kyoko Shibuya under Yamazaki's supervision. While no official budget numbers have been revealed as of this writing, Yamazaki said it was, quote, more than 1 billion yen but less than 3 billion yen, which is between $6.8 and $20 million, although most estimates are $13 to $15 million. Godzilla, ships, and planes are realized through CGI and compositing, and despite the quote-unquote low budget, the effects are mostly on par with Hollywood productions. It helps that the effects are used sparingly. The film also excels at production design with its period sets and costumes, which were filmed on location. Toho even had a replica of the Shinden plane built for it. Overall, while not the most expensive Godzilla film, it is one of the best looking. This is a dark story with plenty of gravity, but it does have a bit of humor and a happy ending. With a giant mutated creature in a historical setting, it's a fairly grounded science fiction film with possible fantasy elements. While -1 is less experimental compared to Toho's more recent Godzilla projects, this is the first G film to be a period piece, and it made the bold move to be set during a volatile time in Japan's history, the occupation era. It doesn't tackle the politics of the time frame, but it features a former Kamikaze pilot as a protagonist and has no qualms criticizing wartime Japan for its disregard for human life, which might be controversial for some viewers. That being said, -1 reinforces the style of Godzilla 1954 with its post-war Showa-era setting and characters, and Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, or GMK, with its themes, visuals, and portrayal of Godzilla. It also has influence from several other G films and 1975's Jaws. The film was produced in light of the success of 2016's Shin Godzilla and was to be made after Toho's contract with Legendary Pictures expired in 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic delayed production. It was then released to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the franchise. Director Yamazaki wanted to explore Godzilla as a specter of war while also entertaining a general audience. As of this writing, the film has grossed 3.852 billion yen, about $26 million, with 2.48 million tickets sold, which ties it with Son of Godzilla's final attendance and surpasses all films in the Millennium series and the Japanese attendance for the MonsterVerse films. It was #1 at the box office for 3 straight weeks after releasing on Godzilla Day, November 3rd, 2023 in Japan. It then grossed a surprising $11 million in the US and Canada when released December 1st, 2023, with preview screenings November 29th and 30th, despite playing on a smaller number of screens than most wide releases. For what it's worth, it is the best reviewed Godzilla film by both critics and audiences on several websites, 98% from critics and audiences on Rotten Tomatoes, and an 8.5 on IMDb with over 6,200 ratings as of this writing. There are many forces at play. Koichi battles PTSD and survivor's guilt, often wondering if he's actually dead, forcing Noriko to reassure him he is worthy to be alive. His duty to country and desire for revenge clash with his desire to live. Most of the characters are desperately trying to survive in a war-ravaged Japan. The US occupation government refuses to take action against Godzilla to avoid antagonizing the Soviets, requiring Japan to protect itself. Even then, the Japanese government does nothing, prompting a civilian force of former soldiers to address the crisis. Sumiko speaks for much of the Japanese public when she angrily berates Koichi for his failure, blaming him for losing the war and bringing all this suffering. The well-meaning Noriko takes responsibility for the orphaned Akiko despite not being equipped to be a mother. Tachibana's desire to move on from the war is conflicted with the protagonist's need for him to repair the Shinden plane for their anti-Godzilla operation. Shiro's youthful eagerness and ignorance, especially with anything related to the war, puts him at odds with his older and wiser colleagues. It's implied that the souls of the garrison who died due to Koichi's negligence may be using Godzilla as an instrument of revenge against him, and possibly against Japan for its disregard for the lives of its soldiers. It's also suggested that Godzilla sees Japan as his territory, which means he must rid it of the humans who live there. The film is filled with rich themes. A potent anti-war sentiment pervades it, which depicts a Japan attempting to recover and move on from their defeat in World War II. Shiro is even berated by his friends for wanting to fight for his country during the war. However, he later finds a better way to serve his nation by rallying tugboats to assist the anti-Godzilla operation. Kenji and Akitsu say they are keeping him out of the anti-Godzilla operation because they are leaving the future of Japan to him and the younger citizens. Family, marriage, and friendship are venerated. Noriko is selfless. She's willing to work to provide for herself and Akiko if necessary. She's even self-sacrificial, pushing Koichi out of the way of a shockwave during the Ginza attack. An almost libertarian spirit is expressed when it falls to civilians to take action against Godzilla because the governments will do nothing. Science rather than militarism finds a solution to the crisis. There's an implied anti-nuclear sentiment with Godzilla being mutated by an American atomic test. Above all, the sanctity of life is celebrated through Koichi's redemptive story arc, showing how wrong Japan was to treat its people's lives cheaply during the war. Let's dive into what may go down as one of the greatest Godzilla epics ever of all time. All right, Mr. Hudgens.
Yep.
I will confess, this might be the honeymoon phase talking.
Okay.
This movie is not only fantastic, I would dare say we might potentially be looking at Mount Rushmore of Kaiju films.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, we have.
My stance
we got dinner
on
at the Markalite Lounge afterward. Yeah.
Right, and we talked about, how there's a lot of fans out there parading it as one thing or another, right? Mm-hmm. They're already trying to redo their favorites list or a list of the worst and best Godzilla movies, and what's the Mount Rushmore, what's the top 10. And to me, stuff like that sort of happens over time.
Right.
It's kind of like when people say a new movie comes out and someone says it's an instant classic. And that term kind of,
a little bit of an oxymoron.
Right. A classic is something that happens over time. And I don't appreciate the idea that the new kid on the block is suddenly knocking off some prior greats just because it is a fantastic movie, but we don't know how it will really stand the test of time just yet. How are we going to feel about this movie in 1 month, 6 months, a year or so? And I'm not saying that I don't like it. I just want to let it simmer for a bit. And for me, I'm in no rush to create a new, I don't, but I'm not in any rush to kind of rank where it is in my favorites and whatnot. I will say that I don't hold it against anyone for thinking that right now, because it is an excellent movie.
I was going to say, experiencing it with you, it was interesting with the 4DX when we're not getting tossed around. You were hyper focused on what you're seeing. You were leaning in and you were studying every frame of this thing. During those quieter scenes.
Yeah, and this was, the first...
And then you looked over at me, and might be a little shocking for my normal listeners, my regular listeners. He just leaned over to me. He's like, that was a damn good movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was just an excellent movie. It was the second time I went to see it was with you. The first time I just kind of, I feel like we as fans, we just kind of take it in.
Yes.
Okay, let's watch the movie. Let's enjoy the movie.
That's why the first time I saw it, I didn't take notes. I just want to soak it in.
Yeah, soak it in for a little bit.
Yeah.
And the second time gave me the opportunity to look at some other things. And of course, I'm going to see it more times. But it's kind of funny because anything I say, or even you say right now, could change completely.
For sure.
In a few months here. And I almost feel like many of fans and critics and podcasters, etc., and writers, should probably, go back and reevaluate in maybe a year or so.
That has been very popular. Yeah.
So, because one thing, I wrote for the city paper in Nashville years and years and years ago, and I quit. And the hardest thing about that was getting in certain reviews on time. I
used to work as a journalist. I know.
Yeah, or Cinescape magazine was a little bit easier to work with because I could just toss in a review with a little more time. The City Paper, however, was very difficult, and I don't think they even review movies anymore. But at the time, they barely gave me 2 days after watching it. Sometimes just that night, and I always lamented, I wish I had more time to really
soak it in.
Yeah. Let it simmer a little bit longer and stuff like that. Because there are a lot of reviews I wrote back then that now I would have written them differently. Even as I have the same opinion of some of them, I would have written them differently.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just so unfortunate that we don't. We live in such a fast food culture that, I mean, look at us right now. You're trying to get this episode out at the height of, the movie coming out in States and stuff like that. And the culture is just, let's rank it. Let's rate it. Let's talk about it right now. Let's call it the best or the worst or the whatever right now. When
I still think our list would make more sense than the AV Club.
Well,
I have criticized the AV Club before because they are it was actually in the previous episode on Monster Island from the Asylum. I found out that they are basically a spinoff of The Onion.
Yeah.
That in that case, I can't take anything they say seriously.
But so we sit here, and what we're talking about right now are initial reactions. Even if we see this movie another 5 times in the next week, which we will.
I'll take a week off of work.
Right. Even if we see this movie 5 times in the next week or so, this is still kind of an initial reaction.
Right.
I like to call it the honeymoon phase. A lot of people like to call it recency bias is another one. Mm-hmm. And
C.S. Lewis called it chronological snobbery. Assuming that in his...
God, I love that.
yeah. I was going to say, he talked about it. I'm trying to remember what book it's from. That's something to add to your blog, Jimmy. But he mentioned it as in the context of saying people in his time were always saying that new books are better than old books. Mm-hmm. I think it applies to everything.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that it really applies to the things we love the most. Because, listen, I'm really, really too close to the kaiju genre, to the Godzilla franchise. Way too close to it. So close, like, it's kind of this, like, nearsighted, farsighted thing where, like, I can't see the full picture because I'm so in love with the franchise. I need time before I, more than anything else. If I were to go see, the Marvels. Is that what it's called?
Miss Marvels. The Marvels,
yeah. Okay, the Marvels. Which I'm not.
Neither am I.
If I were, though, it would probably be easier for me to say whether or not it's a good movie because my personal enjoyment of that franchise, those particular characters, et cetera, is nowhere near as close to my heart as Godzilla.
Right.
And when we're so in love with something, it's so easy to kind of...
Rose-colored glasses.
Yeah. And I try to avoid that. And so what we have here right now is you and I, 2 people who are way too close to this franchise to see straight. And I think time is going to be a massive indicator for how we critique it and how we look at it. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as we're aware of it. There are a lot of fans out there who aren't aware of it, or maybe they are aware of it and they don't care, and that's fine.
Right. I do think there should be some space allowed for that that initial rush of joy if it's something that you liked seeing.
Right.
For whatever reason that you liked seeing it, I think that should be allowed. But at the same time, that's why we call it the honeymoon phase. It can't last forever. Right. And then when you come off of that, you can think about it a little bit more clearly.
And I'll say, it like Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Right.
Not a huge fan of it these days, but when I first went to see the movie, I really, really liked it. Because again, I just wanted to sit there. I wanted to soak it up. I wanted to enjoy it with a bunch of friends who also liked Godzilla. And, as I went to see it again and again and again, I started liking it less each time.
Yeah. There's something to be said, I will say this as a kind of a bit of a caveat, there's something to be said about experiencing a movie like that, the big blockbustery Godzilla films, which there are plenty of those out there. There are plenty of Godzilla films made in Japan that were meant to be entertainment. Yeah. And there's something about seeing it in a theater with a crowd, feel it feeding off of the energy, especially if you see it in something like G-Fest, where it's a room full of fans who are all on the same page as you.
Right, and I think any of those movies would be enjoyable if you saw that with that atmosphere. And here's the thing, I think every movie deserves to be seen in a cinema, in a theatrical setting. That's what they're made for. That's what they're meant for. Even if you're probably not going to like the movie, give the movie a chance to win you over, as well as most movies that you are excited for. You know, because they're meant to be seen on a massive screen with all the surround sound and
yeah. Let me tell you,
trimmings.
I have every time I see an older film. Sometimes even ones that I may have seen multiple times, and on the small screen, and I'm like, wow, these effects look quaint. Then I see it on the big screen as it was originally intended, and suddenly the quaintness just goes away.
Suddenly you realize just how big this movie is. You know, that happened to me with Return of Godzilla. I saw it about a year or 2 years ago in theaters. It was a double feature with Godzilla versus Biollante.
Interesting.
And those two 80s movies are, I believe, the best Heisei Godzilla pictures.
Oh, no question.
Yeah, without putting up much of a fight at all. And I'd always had a hard time deciding which is better, Return or Biollante. And I'd kind of resigned myself, well, it doesn't really matter. Maybe they're equally as good, just for different reasons and whatnot. So I go see the double feature in theaters. Return won me over. It is such a weighty cinematic movie. It looks so good on the big screen. And you know what? I had never seen it on the big screen before. I had never allowed the movie the same chance that so many other movies are allowed when we go see them in theaters to win me over in that environment, in a big screen, surround sound, and all the trimmings and stuff like that. And that's what did it.
Yeah.
That's what won me over.
And I can tell you, if it is meant to be seen on the big screen, it really makes a difference. I don't want to besmirch this because I love it, but there was a special screening of Shin Ultraman that included 2 episodes of the television show. And it became abundantly clear to me watching it, as much as I love classic Ultraman, it was not meant to be seen on a big screen.
No.
It is not shot how a movie should be shot. It's shot like a TV show. So I'm like, okay, I get it. Fuji's cute, but I don't need to see her face that big, because they're doing these TV close-ups on her.
Yeah.
So it really does make a difference. But I will say this, all of that to say, I have not walked out of a theater seeing a Godzilla film feeling like it was worthy of this sort of status in a long time. Like we're talking like going all the way back to 2014. I didn't walk out of 2014 thinking I just saw one of the best examples of the genre. I did not even Shin Godzilla, I did not walk out of that film thinking I just saw one of the best examples of the genre. And I know for a lot of people that's on that list. I like Shin. I like it a lot. I have fervently defended it at points to its detractors. I would not put it on the same level. And I got a hold of our friend Michael, and he asked me, is it better than Shin? That was the first question he asked me. And I said, I liked it more than Shin. Yeah, nothing against Shin. It's hard to compare this with Shin because they're such different movies. So I don't know about, like I said, they're so radically different, but we can unpack that as we go. I'm just saying, none of the other Godzilla films I've seen brand new in the theater the last 10 years. Nowhere close.
Well, then let's just talk about, minus one first. I mean, let's just talk about how much we like this movie, how much we enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. I have very minor critiques of it. I wouldn't call them complaints. It's just critiques.
Yeah. I think the movie is... It's interesting that I've always paraded the franchise as being this sort of like little club for, us cool kids, in a sense. Like, we get it, right? Yeah. And that's fine. I don't care if Godzilla is mainstream. Or mainstream in the same sense that, I don't know. Marvel, yeah, I guess that's the comparison.
The Monsterverse wants that. The Monsterverse wants to be mainstream.
I don't know about... Well, anyway, that's
a hornet's nest we don't need to kick.
Yeah, but I have been very content with, like, all my life, Godzilla kind of being mine, in a sense. And not to say that, I hold it to a higher esteem than any other fan, but what I mean by that is that you grow up, and a lot of people will, a lot of my friends grew up loving Star Wars or something like that, right? Or I don't know. It was Star Wars. Yeah. Star Wars was the big one.
That's an easy one to pick, yeah.
And everyone liked that. And I have never, to this day, I've never really taken to Star Wars. I never really connected
Jimmy
with it.
is so disappointed right now. As we established in the previous episode, his life is a mockbuster. Oh, calm down. Okay.
Star Wars never connected with me as a child.
Mm-hmm.
It never connected with me as adult. And I love Star Trek.
You and I are on the same page. Yeah.
But it never.
We could do a Star Trek podcast so easy.
I know. Don't get me started. But the thing, and so like everyone had Star Wars. Everyone had I don't know, the flavor of the month, whatever was on TV and stuff like that. Godzilla was mine though. Mm-hmm. And I never had any shame or was ever embarrassed as a kid for liking Godzilla. And like I had this reputation as a kid. I was like, oh, you're the Godzilla kid or something. I'm like, I was like, yeah, you are. You know, I said to that, I said, yeah, Dragon Dagger. Dragon Dagger.
Yeah, Dragon Dagger. Yeah, I know. That's why you got Jet in the booth with you. I warned you. You're going to need it at least once this episode.
So I was never embarrassed about it. I never get picked on for it or anything like that, because I mean I was very confident in what I liked at all times, and Godzilla was mine. You know, it was for me. And so I think that I can understand that getting away from the Millennium series and the Shins of the world that are a little more, I guess some people would call otaku adjacent stuff.
I think Shin is accessible to people outside of the fandom, but it's still only particular groups of people. Like I would show Shin Godzilla to anime friends. I mean, not necessarily like kaiju or tokusatsu. I would show it to anime friends because Hideaki Anno. If I lead with, the guy who created Evangelion made a Godzilla movie, I could probably get him to watch it.
See, Shin is a movie I go to for more serious film buffs. I've seen kind of weirder stuff, because let's be honest, Shin is a weird movie.
It is.
It's a weird movie, and I say it as a compliment. I mean, the way it's shot, the way it's organized, the fact that it focuses on characters, but only gives a glimmer of what, you know, the personal lives and stuff are, and instead focuses on their passion for their country, makes it a very, you know, it's a procedural.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like Law and Order or something like that, where we don't get much of a glimpse of the characters' lives. Instead we see their jobs and how passionate they are for it and how good they are at those jobs. That's what the movie revolves around, and it kind of sets it apart from sort of a traditional hero's journey story.
Right.
This movie is
exactly that.
Yeah, it is very much positioned and very much lined up and written to be a mainstream movie. And that's not a bad thing, but this is the first time it's happened in the Godzilla series where I think it's worked.
It's the first time it's happened in a while. The Showa series, I think, for a while would have just been considered normal entertainment. Normal entertainment. The Heisei series, I think the Heisei series at the start was like that, and then once you got to the 90s, I think it started going.
I'm basing that off of box office. I mean, it must be doing something to get that many Japanese in. And quite frankly, I think it was largely because there were so few domestic Japanese films being made during the 90s that, you know, Godzilla was really their only option.
Yeah, basically. And I've heard some people say that they don't like -1 as much because compared to a lot of the other stuff that Toho has been doing in the last decade, it seems less experimental. I've heard that criticism, which is why a lot of people have been gravitating toward the MonsterVerse, because it is comparatively more traditional Godzilla, albeit filtered through an American lens, but still. In this one, I would actually argue this one is experimental, just not in the weird ways, like a Shin, like a Singular Point, like an anime trilogy, which I think all of those are legitimate. I know that's a hot take for some people out there, but I've defended all of them. I have defended all of them. I haven't done an episode on Shin yet. That's coming. But this one is set in the 1940s, so it's a period piece. We have not had a period piece Godzilla film yet. We've had period piece Godzilla stories. For example, the IDW comic Here There Be Dragons. Yep. You know, just as a quick example. And I was fascinated by the idea of this being set during the occupation era of Japan, which you want to talk about a potentially touchy subject. There's that. And then you throw Godzilla into the mix, and I'm like, man, this is either going to be amazing or it's going to be incredibly dangerous. Like, I was preparing myself for that because I'm like, if people thought Shin Godzilla was quote unquote anti-American, oh man, you throw Godzilla into the occupation era. Oh boys, that's potential. That is a potentially dicey territory. But to my surprise, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised, Yamazaki skirts that in this.
I think it might have been interesting to dive into that topic for this time period and whatnot. But he also said he really tried to avoid, doing stuff that Shin already did.
Yeah, he said he loves Shin, and I have some quotations here from him where he cited Shin Godzilla as an influence. He said he loves Shin Godzilla. He screened an early cut of the movie with Anno, and Anno really liked it. So I get the impression that they're colleagues at the very least. I don't know about friends, but they're at least colleagues. They run in a lot of the same circles, because Yamazaki's made anime as well, or worked on anime adaptations. So, which both of them have also done. So it sounds like he's not interested in having that comparison, but he also said, I want to do something incredibly different.
Right. And I think that, since Shin Godzilla already did something that says something about modern day Japan, and Shin Godzilla also, focused on bureaucrats trying to save the country. So he wanted to do something about like private citizens saving the country.
Yeah,
he wanted to do something about a different time period.
Yeah, it's a lot like Grades Again in that regard.
Yeah,
because you have common everyday people. Now, mind you, our main character is ex-military, Shikishima.
Most of the characters are ex-military.
Yeah, the ones we see, which is the thing that's fascinating. And why I said this is how Yamazaki skirts around it, because what we end up having here is it is a civilian-led operation against Godzilla. Now, they're all ex-military, but they're civilians currently, and they do it because they said the U.S. and the Japanese government are not going to help us.
Yeah.
And they give a legitimate reason for why the Americans are not going to help them. We do see stock footage of MacArthur. And a news report saying, hey, he says, you guys are going to have to handle this yourself. And that is the extent of the Americans that we see in this movie.
Right.
But the reason they give for it is that the Americans are concerned that if there are massive military movements in Japan, it will antagonize the Soviets, and they don't want to deal with that. This is like, it's 1947. The Cold War hasn't quite started yet, but if you know your history, and if you want to hear me talk about the occupation era, I've done that on 2 episodes for the original Godzilla and for the Americanized version, King of the Monsters from 1956. And one of the things that the Japanese were concerned about at the end of the war, it was as much of a motivating factor for them to surrender to the Americans, very specifically the Americans, was they were scared of a Soviet invasion. And now, like I said, you have the precursors to the Cold War here, so it makes sense to me.
We keep saying they skirt the topic and whatnot. Something that I find interesting is that, in the original Godzilla, there isn't necessarily blame on the U.S. for the creation of Godzilla, or the awakening of Godzilla, rather, I think is more an accurate way to say it. And, here there's even less spoken about, how...
Yeah, the nuclear stuff is almost not mentioned at all. Like, there's talk about radiation, but nobody talks about the atomic bombings. Nobody talks about any of the things you would expect. The only actual nuclear weapon thing we see is for about 15 seconds. We get a clip where Operation Crossroads on the Bikini Atoll happens, because that just happened to be where this was one of the spoilers with the toys. Proto Godzilla. I don't know if that's the name that people are running with online right now.
Yeah.
Which, we'll talk about that at some point. But, it happened. He happened to be there, got hit by the radiation. Next time we see him, he's big and meaner and angrier. And
you know what? That's fun. I thought that was very effective. The transformation of Godzilla was 2 shots. We see the atomic explosion from a very, docu-inspired shot. Angle.
Very Honda-esque.
Yeah, and then we see a close-up of Godzilla's eye, and
With
something
some skin kind of peeling.
Yeah, so he's getting hit by something, and the skin is peeling and mutating and changing, and then it fades, and that's it. And we have so many stories about Godzilla's various origins by now. You want to know how he became Godzilla? Watch those movies. We have 70 years worth of, I think now, 13, 14 different on-screen continuities of Godzilla's
It feels
origin.
like that at this point.
And we don't need to dive too much further into the how and why. We know.
It's like anytime someone tries to make a Superman or a Batman movie at this point, and they still insist on dealing with the origins. Like, we don't need to.
Right. How many times are we going to see the Waynes get shot?
Yeah.
We don't need
How many times do we need to see Krypton explode?
Right.
It's just...
Which is a decision that, the Robert Pattinson Batman movie, they bring up that his parents died, but we never see it. We don't redo that again. We don't have to. And here, I think the interesting thing is that when sort of going back to Godzilla's origin, Yamazaki briefly shows us something that we've never seen, and that's Godzilla actually getting hit and irradiated by the nuclear bomb. That's it. And he did it in 2 shots. He did it in 2 shots, and then he moves on with the story. You want to know more details about how that works? Great. There's 1954. There's 1984. There's 2000. There's Godzilla's Megaguirus. There's GMK. There's
there's the Monsterverse.
Monsterverse.
Actually, which is actually funny that this movie releases stateside about the same time as Episode 3 of Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, which also shows Godzilla getting nuked.
Right. So I was actually glad that they scooted by that, and they did so by showing something that we haven't seen very quickly. And instead of going the bureaucrat political route and blaming US, they kind of go the Honda route and just say, here's what happened, and now we got to deal with it.
Yeah. Because this is, unlike Shin, and again, I'm not trying to criticize Shin because it was trying to do something different. This is an incredibly personal story.
It is.
And I told you after our second viewing that while I don't think this matches tonally, I do think there is this is structured like a Sekizawa script, where you have 2 stories. You have a human story and you have a kaiju story, and they run parallel. They're separate, and then they intersect at key points. Sometimes they intersect hard and they intersect a lot. Sometimes they kind of bounce off each other. They barely intersect and then they keep going. Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster, I think is one of the best examples to point to for this, because you have the kaiju fighting, and then we have the Venusian princess and the cop, and they're at the psychiatrist's office, and they're going to give her electroshock therapy. And then the kaiju, who are way off somewhere else, knock over the power lines, which cuts the power off to that office. So now they can't give her electroshock therapy. Or then you get to the end, and we've got both climaxes for each story happening at the same time. And then they both resolve each other at the same time, basically, because the monsters knock over boulders that hit the assassin, kill him, and our heroes are safe.
And while I don't know if I agree with you necessarily that, the intersection of the 2 stories are the same in -1, but
they're not.
I find it interesting that you bring up Ghidorah the 3-headed monster, since that was Yamazaki's first Godzilla movie.
Yes.
That's one of his essentials, essentially.
Yeah, he also said GMK was another big inspiration, and which tells me...
I see.
Yeah, I see it too.
Holy cow.
The more I look into what Yamazaki was doing... I mean, I know I've seen several of his films. I know he's a talented director, but he is drawing inspiration from some of the best available in the franchise from before. So I know that one was, and he even said during a screening of GMK with Kaneko He said, I had forgotten the contents of GMK for a while, but it seems like I self-consciously thought about it when writing the scenario for -1. Without realizing it, I was under considerable influence, end quote.
Yeah, and there are so many scenes and there's so many themes in the movie that have GMK written all over this thing. I mean, straight down to who was the engineer, Tachibana.
Yes, Tachibana, which
maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's a coincidence.
I was going to say, as very early on in the movie, there is a character named Tachibana and a character named Taki. As one of the hosts of Henshin Men, having seen all of the original Kamen Rider, that made me snicker a little bit. It is totally accidental. For what I read online, you were correct. You called it. Tachibana is named after the general from GMK.
Yeah, and Yuri, of course, the general's daughter, Yuri from GMK as well. And Koichi, the main character in -1.
Some theorize he's named after Kawakita, actually.
I thought about Kawakita on that. I also noticed that his last name was Shikishima, and the actor who played Rando Yaguchi in Shin Godzilla, who was,
Keep talking, I'll look it up.
Yeah, his name is on the top of my tongue. I don't want to go any further until Rando Yaguchi's actor. He was nominated for Best Actor for the Japanese Academy Awards for this movie.
Hiroki Hasegawa.
Okay.
Hasegawa.
Was it? Is that Rando Yaguchi?
Yep.
Okay.
Looking at it right now. Rando Yaguchi.
And so he played another character in Attack on Titan, the Levi character.
Oh, the live-action movie?
Yeah, Shikishima. And I
Go
saw
figure.
someone on Twitter say it's not a Reiwa-era Godzilla movie unless you have a Shikishima as a main character.
Yeah, Shikishima, played by Ryanosuke Kamiki, who was also at the U.S. premiere with Yamazaki.
Yeah.
And I also found something, this is interesting, I only found one source that talked about this, and I think it was IMDb, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt, that said that Shikishima was also the name of a kamikaze pilot squadron.
Oh.
One of the first, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, which again, that'll come in at the end of the show. But we have a fantastic cast in this. But we're talking about influences. I want to mention here because there's a lot in here to go off more Godzilla films. What some are pointing out is that they also pointed to Godzilla 2014. Actually, Gareth Edwards, he identified inspiration in the movie from Close Encounters and Jurassic Park.
Yeah,
and 54, obviously.
54.
Because of the era and themes and a lot of stuff like that. And Gareth Edwards also said he saw some Dunkirk in there as well, the Christopher Nolan film.
Because Scott Mendelson, one of the few critics I really pay attention to these days, not because I agree with everything he writes, but because I find the way he looks at films a little bit closer to Ebert's way of dividing readers.
Yeah.
and he mentioned the Dunkirk kind of
the ending specifically, which I'm going to admit right here, I am a sucker for the last second reinforcements trope. So I got to say, first time watching it, I was grinning ear to ear and pumping my fist a little bit when the kid, that was his nickname, when he finally made it back. I'm actually trying to look up their names here really quick. But yeah, I just love seeing that. And he's got a broken arm and he's coming in with tugboats.
Right.
It's so good.
I do want to go back to the GMK influence though, because I just think that's one of the most significant. And I think, and I've said this for a while, I really do believe GMK is not just one of the best, but one of the most significant Godzilla movies of the last 20 years. I mean, yeah, it's a really fun giant monster romp, but
I would tell you that I think that's the best of the Millennium series.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, it
goes without. I think hot take. I think Final Wars is more fun, but GMK is the better movie.
GMK and Kaneko's themes for basically the sins of World War II coming back to haunt an entire country was very, at the time, very brave.
Yeah.
I think, given the point in time in Japan that was made and the fact that Toho was really dead set on just entertainment pieces for the Godzilla series, right? And so a lot of the themes of Godzilla literally being the conglomerate specter of those who died in the Pacific War. And Kaneko said, not just Japanese, but Americans, Chinese, Filipino, just everything.
All of them.
All of them.
Which was an idea that was tossed around for 54.
Yeah, it
initially.
was. And so, or at least Ifkabe said so in interviews. Yeah. And so Kaneko's idea that Godzilla is basically coming back to remind Japan that, of what they've forgotten and to sort of take responsibility for a history that they are not necessarily just forgetting, but denying was a big step there. And here you have Koichi Shikishima. He feels guilt for flaking out as a kamikaze pilot.
Yeah, he's a failed kamikaze pilot, which is such an interesting idea. The name almost sounds like an oxymoron.
Right.
A failed kamikaze pilot.
Right. He was
Not
scared.
only that, he lies to get out of it.
My plane's faulty. I'm going to land here.
Yeah, and he lands on Odo Island.
On Odo Island.
Which in this universe, they talk about there being locals. They don't say natives, they say locals. But in here, it's a...
And we never see them.
We never see them.
But we don't have to.
We don't have to.
Yeah.
But it's a repair base for... I think they said specifically for kamikazes, but it's... So it's an outpost where they can have their planes worked on, which is kind of ironic to a certain extent.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was like, wow. But I also think that kind of plays into the criticism of Japan during that time, which this movie...
Which we'll get into that with the Toku topic for sure. But it's also interesting that, that he feels like a failure because he can't do that. And that becomes his major story arc. But just to finish off the influences really quick, Hayao Miyazaki and Jaws. And the Jaws influence is all over this. Is all over this, which we'll unpack that a little bit later. But, going back to Shikishima. So he feels like he failed because he couldn't go through with a suicide attack. And
to compound that.
Yeah. and then he goes on he lands here with this garrison with Tachibana, the mechanic. And Tachibana, the mechanic, gives him a little bit of advice, and there, there's some talk there early on about, trying to see about, why obey an order to die honorably when you know what the outcome is and things like that. Like this movie is setting up its themes very early, very clearly. And then he has another coward moment. So you could say he was a coward for not going through with a suicide attack. We, as modern Americans influenced by Judeo-Christian values are going to look at that like that makes the concept makes no sense to us necessarily.
Well, but for them, it
does.
Yeah.
So in his culture, he's a coward, but then he does something that I think everyone can agree. Yeah, you can look at that as potentially being cowardice because Proto-Godzilla shows up. He's basically Godzillasaurus, but is shaped suspiciously like Godzilla 98 because Yamazaki's a hardcore fan. And then we get a scene that actually reminded me, speaking of Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, reminded me of the scene where the Godzillasaurus attacks soldiers in World War II.
Yeah.
Except this time it's Japanese, interestingly. So it's there, it's stalking around trying to get them, and they tell him, get in your plane and use the guns. He's like, why? He's like, because 20 millimeter guns will kill anything. And then we get another scene that I think this might have, I really wonder if this was one of the things that did carry over from Shin Godzilla as an influence, because we have a scene where his hand shakes, he can't pull the trigger. Godzilla gets startled, he goes after the soldiers, murders them.
Oh yeah, slaughters them. Doesn't even
slaughters them. He doesn't eat them, he just grabs them and throws them because... And I'm wondering if that might have been Yamazaki's little way of pushing the envelope a little bit, because Toho says Godzilla doesn't eat people. That's the rules. Yeah. They always get. I know they give that to the MonsterVerse filmmakers. I'm guessing that they also give that to everybody who works on Godzilla. It's like Godzilla doesn't eat people, so he chomps them, throws them, and he blames himself for them dying because Tachibana is the only one who survives.
Right.
And he passes out. Godzilla doesn't kill him for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And...
because he threw the plane at him. I guess
he threw the plane. I probably thought he was dead. And with Shin Godzilla, the argument can be made, even if the bureaucrats got their heads together and gave them permission to fire, it may have not worked. That uncertainty is part of what makes Shin Godzilla work. I do think the implication here is that maybe Shikishima actually could have stopped it all right there.
Or, I mean, and here's something else. I mean, what if it only angered Proto-Godzilla?
Right.
What if it wasn't going to stop it? It only angered Proto-Godzilla, and then Proto-Godzilla eats him. Or, I don't know, chomps him and kills him. Yeah, something like that.
There's a lot of what ifs still.
Again, he wanted to live. Like, a part of him wanted to live.
He even said that. I think, was it that scene or later on where he says part of...
Later on in the movie. Yeah. Part of him wanted to live. And so that plays in it, too. And, you know, what is cowardice? Is cowardice doing something that you're supposed to and flaking out? Or is cowardice a fear of your existence being threatened? Your life being threatened and whatnot. I really don't think that whether or not the guns could have killed Proto-Godzilla really does matter, because the theme of a character wanting to survive, wanting to live is still there.
Yeah.
You know? I think what it comes down to is that regardless of whether he did or not, the guilt is what matters, and that guilt ended up following him, and this is where
I would go so far as to say it was actually shame in that regard.
Shame, guilt, well, survivor's guilt,
for sure. But I think he felt shame because when he goes back to Tokyo and we see Tokyo bombed out. They talk about the air raids in this, which is the fire bombings.
The fire bombings, yeah, the napalm.
But they never talk about the atomic bombings, like I said. And we meet. He calls her, well, in relation to not Noriko, but Akiko, he calls her auntie. I mean, it's a friend of his who becomes a supporting cast member. Yeah. I'll look her up here in a second. But she sees him, and he's asking her, like, you know, what happened to your family? Where are my parents? And she says, they all died in the air raids. Yeah. And she blames him.
Right.
She says, you should have done your job. She's angry.
And that's the main thing. And I think we get to the end of the film and realize how that character has changed. She was angry. She was looking for someone to blame. She lost her children, of course.
Sumiko.
Yeah, Sumiko.
Played by Sakura Ando.
I really appreciated her character because she was kind of representative of the old guard of Japan. It's like, you should have done your job. You should have kamikaze, you know. Maybe my kids would still be alive if you had.
Yeah, that was the hardest part for her to hear. She said she had 3 kids and they all died.
Yeah. Now, we all know that him slamming his plane into something else was not going to save her children. She was upset. She was angry.
Yeah, but the thing
she bought into old Japanese.
But she represented the culture. Yeah. Who is shaming him for not doing his job.
Yes.
And then throughout the rest of the movie, he has to wrestle with that the entire time. There's even a point, because what ends up happening with his story is we go to Tokyo and he's just trying to survive. This does not pull punches with its depiction of the occupation. I've said the occupation was, the Americans were remarkably kind to the Japanese. They were far more benevolent to a defeated enemy than any other empire had been in the history of warfare. You know, and as I said, they occupied Japan for 7 years, put the country back together, and left. Said, take care of yourselves. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Oh, no. Because the country was absolutely devastated. Even if it wasn't Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the country was decimated. So he's just trying to survive. And he meets Noriko.
Yeah.
Noriko, I'm going to look up her actress here. Noriko, played by Minami Hamabe.
Who is also in Shin Kamen Rider. Mm-hmm. I appreciated her character a lot more here.
Yeah.
I was not a fan of Shin Kamen Rider, so I felt like she had more to work with here.
Yeah, she was the girl in that one, right? The main girl. Yeah, I like her better here.
Yeah.
But so she is a young woman. There's a joke. He says, like, well, where's your husband? He's like, do I look like someone who would have a husband or who had a husband? And he's like, he tries to imply she's a prostitute. And she's like, she feels she's insulted by that. Very constant. It's like, well, people got to survive. That is a thing that happened, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There were women who sold their
nuance.
There were women who sold their bodies to try to survive in the occupation era because it was horrendous. They meet each other. She has a baby, Akiko. The baby is not hers. She says later, her parents were dying, and they gave her to me and said, take care of her.
Akiko's parents.
Yeah, Akiko's parents.
Yeah, parents, not her, not Noriko's.
Yeah. Her parents are dead.
Yeah, her parents are dead, but she has no relation to the baby.
She has no relation to the baby, so she just takes her. She's a young woman, never been a mother, and she gets told by Sumiko, it's like, you don't know what you're doing. And she has to tell them how to take care of a baby, And so basically what ends up happening is the three of them just move in together, trying to survive together.
And it just kind of happens, too. Like, it's a very natural, well, they're just here.
They're just here, and they're just trying to...
Shigashima just kind of decides to... He doesn't even really decide to take him in. They just kind of stay there, and he just lets them stay there.
He just lets them stay there, and then he gets chewed out about it later because they kind of look at him like, is something going on? And then we find out later that, because the three friends from the boat, who are amazing characters, I want to point out, we'll get to them, they're hanging out in their house having dinner. And at this point, we flash forward a couple of years, and Akiko is that little actress. I don't know where they found her. That is some of the best baby acting I have ever seen.
Oh my god!
I don't know how they made that work, but they made it work.
From King Godzilla vs. Kong, eat your heart out. This little girl.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love Gia too, but Gia is older. Gia was older. This is a 2-year-old.
This is like a 2-year-old, 3-year-old girl somehow taking direction and just like tugging our hearts and saying the lines perfectly and as cutely as possible.
Yes, for sure. So, and they tell him, they look at him funny, and then we find out later, she wants you to marry her. You know how she feels. And they ask him flat out, and this is actually when, spoiler warning, we think Noriko is dead, which you did not call that.
Yeah.
Like I said, we'll unpack that. And his response when they called him out on that, and it was a drunk friend even, it's like that old saying, a drunk man's words are a sober man's thoughts. And he says, my war isn't over yet. That hit me like a hammer when I watched that the first time, because as someone coming from a military family and having grandfathers who were World War II veterans, that resonates, because for a lot of them, and whether it was World War II or Vietnam or whatever war it was, even the more recent ones, for a lot of them, the war never really ended. They took it home with them because they saw things. They were dealing with PTSD. They didn't have that term back then. But clearly, Shikishima is dealing with PTSD.
Yeah, he's dealing with that. He's dealing with survivor guilt. He's dealing with a lot of demons from the war. And, I really took to the moments where he woke up from nightmares a lot.
That happened a couple of times.
The first nightmare we see is he sees the Proto-Godzilla stomping the engineers on Odo Island again, which to me, and this was what I felt was another GMK influence, really reminded me of the moment when Takabana in GMK is recalling the moment in 1954 he lost his parents. And in that scene in GMK is what made me really want a period piece Godzilla movie. I remember seeing GMK in 2002. It was a VHS bootleg I gotten from Japan. Someone shot this movie off a theater screen.
Gosh. That is all kinds of illegal. Don't say that too loud, because I don't know if Raymond the lawyer can save you.
It had no subtitles, but I recall the moment. And I could, context clues, I could figure, obviously, he was recalling 1954 and whatnot. And I thought to myself, man, what would be really cool is a period piece Godzilla movie. And ever since then, I really wanted that. And for some reason, Shikishima's dream really brought me back to that moment in GMK's kind of memory of horror for him. And
it should be noted, this is not Yamazaki's first foray into doing a period piece in this period. Great War of Archimedes.
Yeah.
Takes, it takes place mostly before this, but it opens in 1945. But it mostly takes place in the 30s, and then he did the Eternal Zero.
The Eternal Zero, which I've seen, is also a great, definitely. I mean, he's kind of the period piece guy in Japan, you know? So,
that period, anyway.
Right, yeah. So, and this is where the broader GMK theme comes in. He's haunted by Godzilla. Godzilla's sort of representing a lot of things to him, representing his failure to act, representing his survivor guilt coming back to haunt him and whatnot. And you mentioned earlier, Noriko is thought dead.
Yeah, to put it into context, Godzilla attacks Ginza.
Ginza, yeah.
And the two of them are there. He actually went there to find her. She just got a job. Because she's like, if he's not going to marry... The implication, we can, looking back on it, is that if he's not going to marry me, I have to take care of myself. So I'm going to go get a job. So she gets a job. Godzilla attacks and she's on a train. And as we all know, Godzilla hates trains.
And in a scene which is almost a shot-for-shot remake of the 1954 sequence.
Yes.
In some cases.
Yeah, and then she falls out. She falls out, gets in the water. He finds her in a fleeing crowd. And then we get the not the first atomic breath, but probably the most dramatic.
Yeah.
Although that first one startled me the first time I saw it, where he shoots it from underwater at the battleship,
right,
and just blows it up. I have been a Godzilla fan for years. I am used to seeing the atomic breath. It is hard to surprise me with the atomic breath anymore.
But they keep finding new
ways
to do this.
And they do.
They really do.
They do, and we'll get to that. So he unleashes it, and it creates this massive explosion. She shoves him out of the way into an alley, and this massive gust of wind just smacks her. A shockwave just smacks her, and she just goes flying, and we don't see her again.
I had resigned myself, when enough time had passed in the film, I had resigned myself that she was gone.
Yeah, I was willing to go with that, but I was also thinking to myself, no body, no death.
Yeah, but I don't know.
That's a trope.
For me, I was just, she's not in the story anymore. She's gone.
Yeah.
And the big thing here was that Koichi Shikishima, before the attack on Ginza, he had thought, maybe I can start trying to be happy again.
Yeah.
And then
he was seriously considering it. Yeah.
After the attack and after Noriko's funeral, he looks back at the photos of the engineers, which he takes responsibility for their death, and says something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, something to the effect that you won't let me be happy, will you?
Yeah,
he's talking to the engineers.
Yes.
Here we go back to
I was going to say
soldiers of the Soldiers of War Dead from GMK conglomerating into Godzilla and attacking, and he now feels that Godzilla is like symbolic or of their rage and coming after him now personally, not letting him be happy, like seeking retribution for him or something like that. It's never stated, but it's written all over that scene. And I sat there going, there is so much to read into this. And to have that massive influence from GMK, the main theme in GMK that made it such a great movie, get tossed into a immediate post-war Godzilla film like this, blew my mind. And it was on full display during Noriko's funeral without saying it outright, without spelling it out for us. All he had to do was say, you're not going to let me be happy, or something to that effect. And all I could think of was Spirits of War Dead.
Yeah.
I was blown away by that moment.
Well, and I'm sure that in particular was great for you, because I know you've actually been advocating for Yamazaki to direct a Godzilla movie for years.
Oh, yeah. No, I thought he was going to be the one who directed Shin Godzilla. We didn't know what the title was at the time. Just Godzilla, 2016, I guess. We didn't know what Shin Godzilla was going to be at the time. When it was announced, I was predicting Yamazaki was going to be the director for that one, because his schedule was free. He'd always wanted to do a Godzilla movie. It made sense. I was wrong. But then, when the theme park ride,
so this is not the first time he has actually directed Godzilla. He has a trilogy of period dramas called, was it Always
Sunset on 3rd Street.
Always Sunset on 3rd Street. For some odd reason, I keep getting that mixed up with Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I know, Jimmy, it's completely different. See, both you and Jimmy are on the same page there. But yeah, so they're in the second one. There's a dream sequence. This is from 2007.
It's not really a dream sequence. It's a character at the beginning is writing a story.
Right, but it's a fantasy sequence.
It's a fantasy sequence.
And Godzilla is in it. And then there was the ride from a couple years ago.
Yeah, Godzilla the ride, the decisive battle or something like that. And it had a very similar Godzilla design as Godzilla -1. And also had Rodan and my least favorite King Ghidorah in it. And and that was an amusement park ride. It is an amusement park ride. I think they've expanded on it and turned it into like a escape room.
Oh, okay. A Godzilla themed escape room?
Yeah, or something to that effect.
Hey, board of directors, I know we're not on the best of terms. Can we have one of those?
But when that came out, I thought to myself, I wonder if he's any closer to being the director for the next Godzilla, or maybe this is kind of like an audition to Toho for him to be the director for next. Turns out he was working on the movie when that came out, and I was thrilled. I've been wanting Yamazaki to direct a Godzilla movie since 2015, and now here we are, 2023, and he's done it. And Koichi, going back to Koichi, having such incredible guilt and trauma and allowing that to represent such incredible themes from the strongest of the series led to not just one of the most really engrossing storylines in the Godzilla series, but one of the Godzilla movies that has the greatest depth to talk about in terms of thematic relevance. And I don't know. It was just incredible to sit through.
Yeah, I just found my note here about you're talking about borrowing from the best of the series. So some of the other ones that I didn't mention were the U.S. Soviet tensions, like in Return of Godzilla. Although that's much subtler here than it is in that movie. And some say that the protagonist motivations are similar to those from Megaguirus and Against Mechagodzilla.
I've seen that too. Yeah, I don't. I mean, there's certainly a something of a revenge-esque arc after Noriko dies. Well, dies. Air quotations.
Well, I mean, he gets called up for it. It's like you're just doing this because you want to avenge her.
And he says yes.
Yeah,
I am.
He doesn't hide it. Yeah, and then we talked about exploring the origins like in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, but again, a lot faster.
A lot quicker.
A lot quicker, and a ragtag group of people coming together to combat him, like in Shin Godzilla.
Right. Of course, it's a different type of ragtag.
A very different kind of ragtag.
The Shin Godzilla ragtag group, they are
the nerds and the troublemakers.
Right. They're the people who it's their job to make sure the country's infrastructure is strong enough to protect its people. Whereas the characters in Godzilla -1 understand the country's infrastructure isn't strong enough to take care of its people, so they take matters into their own hands.
Yep. And it's about to go back to Shikishima. So he makes this determination. So now he's like, I'm actually, at first it's just, I'm going to do this. And then they start talking about the plan. And the plan initially is we're going to sink Godzilla so deep the water pressure will kill him. If that somehow doesn't, we have a plan B. We're going to hit an instantly inflated raft.
Godzilla floaty wings.
Floaties, and then he's gonna rise so fast the decompression will kill him.
Will explode.
So it's very sciencey. Yeah, which is
but you know what? It wasn't so sciencey that you couldn't get it pretty quickly.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't. So it all made total sense.
No singular pointing in this Godzilla story.
Oh, nice one. Oh, I like that one. So so they do all of that because he learns, that's another great moment we have for him where he gets a new job. And where he's basically
before Godzilla even attacks.
He's basically a minesweeper. That's how he meets the characters on the boat.
He's on Microsoft Windows 95, hitting a bunch of squares.
Yeah.
Hoping he gets that X.
Yep. Yeah. Did you invent that, Jimmy? I call Bullzord on that. Anyway. And this boat actually has, how big did they say it was? it was a big machine gun on. I think they said it wasn't 20 millimeter. I think it was 15, something like that.
It wasn't as big as the one on his plane.
It wasn't as big as the one.
No.
But and they figure out he's the best shot. Right. So the idea is what they're trying to do is they're getting the ones that are tethered. They get it to come up and then they shoot it, detonate it, because they said there's 60,000 of those things sitting around. And we need to clean it up. Right. It's
clean the ocean so shipping lanes can.
Yeah,
get
it's a residue from the war.
Leftover.
It fits nicely with the themes. And he discovers when they're doing that because they find out like, they set aside here to find Godzilla. Well, that was nice. And then there's that wonderful joke where the guy who's basically the captain of the boat.
Oh, hold on. Starts with an A. Hold on. I know this one.
Oh no,
Captain Akitsu.
Akitsu, played by Kuronosuke Sasaki.
Yeah,
and there's that wonderful joke where he's like. It's like I don't like doing what the government what the government says.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Oh wait, no."
Dr. Noda. I thought you said you don't like doing what the government says, or I thought you hated government orders extremely, but someone has to do it. And then they see Godzilla take out the other boat. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, okay, never mind. Yeah, so there are moments of levity in this, but it feels very natural.
Yes,
it's a very dour movie, but it's not nihilistic as we'll explain here. No. So. They're like, use the extra mines because they have some of them on the boat. They let it go. One goes into Godzilla's mouth, and then Shikishima grabs the gun, and then it's this moment where he's like, now I'm actually going to do what I should have done on Odo Island. And he starts shooting at Godzilla. Bullets just bounce off of him at this point, but he hits the mine, blows it up, and it actually takes out a side of his face, and then we actually see him physically regenerate, which is...
I don't think we've ever seen.
We've always heard about it. I think like the closest we've ever gotten to it before this was 2000.
I was about to say, and I think because Orga was using Godzilla's cells to regenerate his body.
And that's when it's given a name and everything. Like we'd always known it was that, and then in the first Mark Cerasini novel delved into it
a little bit. Well. And the Heisei series did as well with Godzilla versus Biollante and stuff.
For sure.
But we never see it. Godzilla, like a vine will go through Godzilla's hand and he'll pull it out and the next shot it's instantly healed.
Yeah.
So he just had healing powers faster than Wolverine in the Heisei series.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Rivals Deadpool at this point.
Yeah.
But I should know. I play Deadpool. Anyway. I know it's weird. But anyway, so we see that happen. So he knows Godzilla's weakness is we have to hit him from the inside. So he comes up with this crazy idea. I'm going to fly a plane laden with explosives into Godzilla's mouth. I'm going to do what I should have done in the war.
Right. Because, and if you think back to it, had he kamikazed, maybe those engineers wouldn't have died. And maybe Noriko wouldn't have died.
Yeah.
And, because it's a ripple effect.
Right.
Of things that he's had and he's trying to take responsibility for or believes he needs to take responsibility for that. Even though this movie and the characters in this movie have a lot of resentment towards Japan. I think in Shin Godzilla, there were arguments or could be arguments made that Shin Godzilla was very, very nationalistic and...
I don't think it was, but...
And whatnot. Well, yeah, but I mean, the argument could be made. And still
the argument can be made.
And whatnot. Shinji Higuchi clarified in one of the masterclass interviews, Kaiju masterclass interviews, that he never got the impression from the movie, and that was never the intention. In fact, he felt that was a very, pro, world united movie and whatnot. Here... I don't think there's any question. There's a lot of resentment towards Japan because Dr. Noda, who was a weapons engineer in the war.
Kenji Noda.
Yes.
Played by Hidetaka Yoshioka.
Who's won 2 or 3 Japanese Academy Awards for acting.
And in this movie, he looks like Shotaro Shinomori.
Or he looks like the guy from 16 Candles.
Yes. When I first saw him in the trailers, like he's going to be kind of like the Dr. Yamane, isn't he? Yeah, and he kind of is.
I thought so, but he's
kind
actually no, he's different, man. He was my favorite
His nickname is Doc.
Yeah, Doc. He was my favorite character on the boat of the.
Yeah, and Akitsu, he was what was he? Captain.
Yeah. And then the kid was.
And then the kid.
Yeah. And so.
Sometimes useless.
Yeah. Dr. Noda, where was I going with this? He gives this big speech about how someone asks him before the final confrontation with Godzilla. Someone asks him, so we should prepare, insinuating that we should all prepare to die, to lose our lives. And he said, no. This country has been way too careless with lives. You know, planes without ejection seats.
Which sets up the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it does set up an end. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Planes without ejection seats. You know, talking about how it was Japan's fault that so many died from starvation, and famine and whatnot, and then finally landing on Kamikaze. Of course, the camera rightfully cuts to Shikishima in that moment, who is not, like, you can tell on his face, he's not really buying into the speech yet. But Dr. Noda is openly criticizing the Imperial Army, wartime Japan, that got them into this mess.
Because human life was cheap to them.
Right, human life. And Captain Akitsu, he's been criticizing Japan the whole time. I was blown away when he said, information control is Japan's specialty. And I was like,
yes, which is
oh my god,
which is interesting because that was a thing that the Americans did in the occupation. They had to control. There was censorship in the media because they knew if the wrong things got out, whether it was worthy of insurrection or not, they did not want to rile up the population.
I thought the captain was actually referring to wartime Japan because they did not inform the people how the war was really going. They figured it out, but they did not inform the people that they were really losing the war at all,
Yeah. By the way, I just realized this cast list has the little girl for Akiko.
Who
her name is Sei Nakatani.
Well,
the Oscar goes too.
Right. I was like, and as I said, she, how she could, say some of these lines and stuff. It occurs to me that they were probably dubbed over, but even still, I was very impressed with that little girl.
They made her cry on command.
Again, I think they probably dubbed that over too.
But she's actually crying.
She's actually, yeah.
But anyway, so there was that, and like I said, that sets up the ending because Shikishima he gets a new plane. I have found some interesting things about that plane.
That plane, which
we'll
not aware of.
We'll talk about that. And he says, I'm going to do what I should have done. But he lies to everybody and says, I'm going to lure Godzilla away. They're going to tangle him up with a couple of boats, get him tied up, weigh him down. If that doesn't work, it inflates, goes up.
He's essentially the plan C that he didn't.
No one accounted for. So he antagonized him, gets him to follow. And it's one of the rare times where I can say that the airplanes flying that close actually makes sense. Jimmy and I have had long discussions about how stupid some of these pilots are.
I know. I'm thinking back to Sea Monster. I'm like, well, Shikishima's a better pilot than the Red Bamboo. We got that much.
The Red Bamboo might be some of the most incompetent terrorists to ever exist. But anyway, I mean, come on. I've read a comic book where they're fighting Adam West Batman. What do you expect? I'm still waiting for issue 3, dang it. If you're listening to this, where's issue 3? I need a conclusion. I've been waiting. Anyway, I need to interview you again, too. Anyway, so he gets the opportunity to fly the plane in there, and he does it because he now feels like he has nothing to live for.
Right.
Noriko, as far as he knows, is dead, and he tells Sumiko, leaves a note with Akiko, who gives it to Sumiko that says, take care of her. Here's money.
Yeah.
Use it for her. Because he was even like, she's not my kid. There was a level of detachment with him initially, but then he was getting to the point where he's like, you know what? Maybe.
And then the Ginza attack.
And then And then I have to tell you, I was sitting here and I was thinking to myself, I was a little suspicious that it was going to turn out there was an ejection seat about 10 minutes before that. But I also realized there's really only one of two ways that this movie's going to end. And I was still having a little bit of tension the first time, just wondering which way are we going to go here.
Right.
And I will tell you, even though there was really only 2 possibilities, and I was a little bit suspicious, my word, Yamazaki wrings every ounce of drama out of that scene. Because everything goes silent. The music cuts. The sound effects are gone.
You could
and
hear
it's just
a pin
drop. It is nothing.
You could only hear Rebecca say, Jack, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, basically. And, so you have this going on, and Godzilla's charging up the atomic breath, and it's just a montage of reaction shots from everybody.
I mean, we all knew who was coming in at the end of those reaction shots, but even still, the way he put that together, edited it, shot it was...
Yeah, and the thing is the silence actually went on longer than I was expecting. Which actually increased the tension substantially. And then the plane hits, blows up. Half of Godzilla's head is gone. Okay? Like everything above the bottom jaw, gone. And then you see a parachute.
Parachute. And let me tell you, the first time I saw this movie, I saw it in IMAX with my family. I dragged my mom and my dad to see it. They are not Godzilla fans, but they know I love it, and so they want to kind of share in what I enjoy and stuff like that. So I was visiting my mom and dad. They live about 2 states away. And my sister, of course, she wanted to see it. She's a Godzilla fan too. And we dragged them to the IMAX. And my mom was genuinely shocked when she saw the parachute. It was really funny to watch her reaction because she audibly gasped at that. Because I think she was under the assumption he was going to go through the Kamikaze, and the movie's going to allow this to be a Japan stuck in their ways sort of...
Or the noble sacrifice, which is a Godzilla tradition.
I had guessed that the ejection seat was there, because earlier on when you see Tachibana working with the plane, he touches the seat, he looks at it when
and it's but the shot is from really far away, so you can barely see it.
No, it was pretty close up. He's right next to the cockpit.
Yeah, well, it's still zoomed out a bit.
And I kept thinking, they're not going to like re-orphan this kid. There was just too much writing on him surviving. I'd figured out pretty much that he was going to survive somehow. For me, it didn't take away from how well done that whole sequence is, and how relieving it still was to see the parachute.
Yeah, and then
because
then we get the flashback where we see the rest of that scene. It was so simple. He just points back there. It's like, push that button, and it'll eject you. And Shikishima is shocked at that point. He just looks at him funny, and all this guy says. And keep in mind, Tachibana is the one other survivor from the Proto-Godzilla attack. Hates his guts.
Odo Island, yeah.
Hates his guts. And the only reason he's even there, in a scene that's actually a little bit funny, is Shikishima wrote a dozen letters to all like the possible addresses he could be, and just said things to insult him to get him to show up, just to kick his butt.
Tachibana's fault that the attack happened. And,
and then he just to get him to come find him and punch him in the face, and then he just begs him to work on it. And like Tachibana is so mad, he punches him in the face, knocks him out, and ties him up.
Yeah, it was a great sequence.
Yeah,
one of my favorite scenes actually is their meeting. Actually, any scene with Tachibana and Shikishima are some of my favorite in the movie.
Yeah, hilariously, the 4DX people are just so desperate to have motion going on, even when it's not an action sequence, that whenever people are just shoving each other around in this movie, it shakes a little bit. But all he says when he sees Shikishima react is, live. That's it.
And I think,
it's almost like he's forgiving him. Like, I'm giving you permission to live.
It's not even that he's forgiving. I don't think... If it were him forgiving Shikishima...
Maybe forgiveness is not the right word.
The theme... That's the wrong theme to walk away from. I think that you have a group of people here, most ex-military, right? Who have already lost so much. Who have already lost so many people. Who've already seen so much death. They don't want to be a part of any of that anymore. Tachibana doesn't want to kill someone else. He's not going to make a plane to murder someone, essentially. He's not going to use a plane as a noose. He's an engineer. He loves planes. He's not going to do it. Everyone is so sick of war at this point in time. They're fighting Godzilla not because they want to, because they have to. And they're more enthusiastic about fighting Godzilla because now they're doing it on their own terms in a way where they don't have to sacrifice lives, or hopefully not sacrifice lives. The goal is to defeat the enemy and come back home. And Takashi didn't want any more death. He didn't want to bury another body. He didn't want to be responsible for burying another body, and that was, people call this an anti-war movie. Well, this and every Godzilla movie, essentially.
Basically,
But one of the reasons that this is so anti-war is that we are looking at a cast of characters exhausted from watching death. You're not going to build a machine for victory just to watch someone else die, even just one more person. And I had a feeling Takashi was going to be one of those people who made sure Shikishima made it out.
Right.
It was beautiful.
It was. It really was. And then we see Godzilla disintegrate. In a scene that made me think of GMK again.
Yeah, well, the tail end,
the tail end, Well, not only the tail end, but even just the sink in the water and the lights is bursting out of it. The energy is bursting out of it.
The atomic ray coming out of Godzilla's neck.
Yeah.
In GMK, kind of. That did kind of remind me of the streams of energy coming out of his body.
And then we get to the denouement that surprised even you.
Oh my God! No,
because everybody comes home, and then here comes Sumiko with Akiko, and she's got and there's a telegram, and we saw it cut away, and there was this telegram. I think the implication was that she got this, and it was like maybe it was supposed to be a letter from Shikishima saying, I'm going through with a suicide attack. And now
I knew it wasn't from Shikishima. I did not.
I was wondering. I didn't know who it was from, but I was kind of like, maybe that's what it's supposed. We're to be led to believe it is. And then she just shows up and she just calls his name, and then she just gives it to him, and he reads it, and his jaw drops, and she just hits him twice.
Okay, and
it's almost like she's like, "Go,
did you
go
notice
now?"
That was a callback earlier in the movie when she's hitting him for not going through with the kamikaze. She has totally made a 180 now. In the beginning, she hit him because she was mad that her children had died, and she's hitting him because, she wants to blame him for not going through the kamikaze, and she like you said, represented wartime Imperial Japan and its values, and she was criticizing him for not upholding them. Now she's criticizing him for almost dying, for almost going through with it, for almost abandoning Akiko and nearly Noriko as well. And she's hitting him the exact same way at the beginning of the movie. And I was like, man, I love that callback, and I love this character because I couldn't stand her at the beginning. But then at the end, it was really endearing.
Yeah.
How she did it and stuff like that.
Yeah, and what made it even better is there's no dialogue. It's just it is pure acting.
Some of the best moments in the movie are no dialogue. Like I said, the moment where I connected the Spirits of War Dead theme to how Shikishima feels haunted by Godzilla. Maybe he's representing those spirits of the mechanics coming back to get him. What do you have? One line? The best. That's what gets me about this movie is what's not said.
Yes,
what's not said.
So anyway, we have this, but the audience still doesn't know. We as the audience still don't really know what's going on. We don't know. The next scene is he's at the hospital with Akiko, goes into a room, and we get this slow reveal, edited in with a reaction shot of him just being like, "Oh my gosh!" And there's Noriko on the hospital bed. Half her face covered in bandages, but she's alive. And what's the first thing she says? And then everything comes full circle thematically. She says, "Is your war over?"
Yeah.
And he doesn't even say anything. He just
holds her.
He weeps. He holds her, and just buries his face
in her arms.
And that's the answer she needs. And then you found something to obsess over for a few days.
I did find obsessive. And then she turns her neck as she's holding him. And on her neck, this like black kind of veiny strain crawls up her neck. Kind of, someone mentioned kind of in the shape of Godzilla's spine. A lot of people just think it's a symbol of radiation poisoning.
Yeah, the novelization, I think, said it was a bruise. But the wildest and stupidest take I heard on that was that she has regenerative
healing powers
from Godzilla.
Here's why that one pisses me off.
Oh, where's that button?
No, she does not have
Wrenchmaster activated.
She does not have regeneration powers. That gets dangerously too close to the whole monsterverse magic healing radiation. This is a wartime movie or a post-war time movie about culture that was rocked by the atomic bomb. And we already have, like, earlier in the movie, how parts of Ginza were cut off because of radioactive contamination from Godzilla. No, she cannot heal. If you think that, you are too stupid to breathe oxygen. Stop.
Are you done?
For now.
But like I said,
Let me ask you something. So going back to Noriko though, and the note, when she got the note with Akiko, her name? Sumiko. When Sumiko got the note with Akiko,
I just realized there's lots of co-names in this.
Yeah,
Noriko,
it's hard,
Sumiko, Akiko.
You said you didn't know who the note might have been from.
No.
I maybe for a split second considered Noriko, but I was still resigned that she was dead. It's something that they all that moment still had us believing she was dead, even though the note came. I was like, all right. I mean, who else could it have been from? Now that I think about it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think we were just so invested in Shikishima and everything going on with the
that was
operation.
mid-battle.
Yeah. That we maybe it didn't quite register with us.
Right.
Or like I said, I was like, maybe it's from him.
Can I point out
although that really doesn't make sense when I think about it, because he already left her.
He already left her a note. Yeah. So I didn't think it was from him. Can I point out something about this whole conversation that we've had? Most of this discussion has been about two major things: the themes of the movie and the characters. Very little have we spoken of Godzilla. I would have it no other way, quite frankly, because I think the majority of these movies, what makes them so great is how the actors reactors. There are reactors in these movies.
I was gonna say, I've seen the Heisei movies. Those are reactors.
How the actors react to the monsters and what themes we derive from those monsters and the reaction to what they represent. And yeah, we've got Godzilla. Yeah, there are some pretty solid visuals in this. I mean, it's CG. That's all I can really say. The CG worked, and I never felt like I was taken out of the movie. But
Yamazaki and his team, they know what they're doing.
Yeah,
Is it Robot Communications?
Yes.
Yeah. They know what they're doing.
But by and large, what makes the movie work so well are the story and the themes. Like what we have here to sit here and talk about are these characters and how they react, again, to the monster and what the monster represents for them, not just the culture, but the individual characters.
Right. That's ultimately what monsters are about in culture. They represent something. It's usually an anxiety of some kind.
And it's movies like this and Shin Godzilla that really make me think, okay, let's have the MonsterVerse just keep doing their monster versus monster thing. I actually like the idea of more of these Godzilla versus the world kind of pictures. Only because, okay, we have plenty of monster versus monster movies. They outnumber the solo Godzilla movies, essentially. And I think what we're seeing here with these Godzilla-only outings are some kind of more nuanced experimentation of what to do with the character and whatnot. Now, if
it's almost like they know they have to do that because they only have Godzilla with them. They can't lean into, and I don't mean it this to sound derogatory, they can't lean into the crutch of monster versus monster, Godzilla versus the world.
Right, exactly, because they've tried that. It worked with the Heisei series, bombed with the Millennium series, unless, of course, there were some strong themes. And And now they're going just crazy with their kind of experimentalness. That being said, we brought up GMK again. The very last shot of this movie
is GMK.
Is GMK's
Which
ending,
I wondered to myself when I saw it, because I had this wonderfully cathartic, emotional scene where our hero is reunited with basically the love of his life. And little Akiko gets to meet her, because she's been calling them mom and dad the entire movie. And, you know, Shikishima's even like, I'm not your dad. But now he's learned to accept that. So we have this big emotional moment, and then we cut to
Godzilla's lifeless husk of a...
whatever's left of it starts slowly regenerating, and the Afukabe theme starts kicking in. And I'm
just like GMK.
And like, this is just like GMK, except it's not quite as subtle. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, and I asked you this question actually after we saw it, does this take away from Shikishima's journey?
Yeah.
If it seems as if everything he did might have been in vain. Although, when I thought about it, I was like, could that argument be made about Serizawa?
Well,
From 54, I mean.
Because if Serizawa hadn't done that, then we'd have two Godzillas.
Yeah, I guess you could put it that way.
Yeah.
But it also, but it does go back to Yamane's comment at the end of that movie where he said, as long as there's radiation, there's going to be a Godzilla.
Well, I think it's, and I've said this before in an article in Kaiju Ramen. I was talking to you and others about this. Godzilla is no longer, it's not just about the bomb. It's about how the people and the culture and the country have reacted to the bomb since it was dropped. You know, it's about this kind of evolution and modification of the character and the franchise as Japan has grown. Because, you know, the bomb was dropped and what happened? Well, Japan became a capitalist nation. Well, they became a capitalist nation too quickly, and that was kind of that was difficult to segue into. And so you get movies like King Kong versus Godzilla, or Mothra versus Godzilla, or Mothra. And then you got the Cold War, and you got issues because of the sudden change of capitalism and jobs and whatnot. You have the Cold War, you have an uptick in violent crimes and rape in Japan, and then you get Invasion of Astro Monster. Then you get, you know, all these corporations being built off the capitalist system. I know this sounds very anti-capitalist, that's not where I'm going with it, but don't have an excellent record with waste management. You get stuff like Godzilla versus Hedorah.
Even Godzilla versus Gigan, which was commenting on the market penetration from outside corporations, particularly American corporations.
You get nuclear tests still happening right outside Japan's front door. You get movies like Godzilla vs. Megalon. You know,
one thing it comments on.
Yeah, you get you know, the Cold War going on, and you know, Japan kind of being stuck in between. Again, these two nations that could, like, you know, blow them up in the middle of their conflict. You got Return of Godzilla. You got the nationalism themes and the economic bubble just expanding. You got Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. You know, these movies are built on a ripple effect from the atomic bomb being dropped. -1 is no different. Yamazaki knows what this franchise has had to say about the bomb has already been said. Now let's continue tackling, you know, what these movies have been doing since the original. And that is commenting on how the bomb being dropped on Japan has changed Japan. And this movie is a more immediate reaction to that, to kamikaze pilots, to how Imperial Japan treated its people and whatnot, and how it needs to grow and how it should change. You know, I love that line, this country never changes. Maybe it can't.
Maybe it can't.
Maybe it can't, which oddly, terrifyingly echoes the line, my favorite line in Shin Godzilla. A line I think is one of the best in the series. Post-war lasts forever.
Oh my gosh.
You know? And so, okay, so it doesn't comment on the bomb. So what does it comment on? The value of life in the wake of the old guard of Japan being done away with? Does it comment on the traumas of Japan from World War II? Because it's an interesting comment on. That's such an old, the war was so long ago and Japan is still stuck on that. It's a brave topic in Japan to tackle because it's something that still affects them. And Godzilla in this movie still affects Shikishima even after the war is over. So I think to say, his war is over is that he got over the hump. He got past this idea that he should have died. He took on something that he was terrified of and that he admitted he was terrified of, and not only fought it, but fought to survive and won both battles. He's got tons of people telling him to live. He's being given options to live. He's being told by the person who resented him the most to live.
2 of them.
Yeah, 2 of them. And he does. And he comes out on top. He comes out as the hero. He faced his fear and he lived. And he got, praised for it, essentially. Whereas like when he came back from Japan after not going through with his plane into a ship, probably, he was, ostracized, essentially. So I do think that this movie's about a reconsideration of, the old Japan, Imperial Japan, and how, the country does need to continue to change, which is a fairly similar theme to Shin Godzilla, which is also saying the country needs to change.
I just remembered Noriko didn't hate him, but there's a scene where he wakes up from one of his nightmares and she is desperately trying to comfort him because he's like, maybe none of this is real. Maybe I'm actually dead. And she's like, no. Those are just ghosts. You need to, please live.
Spirits of the war dead.
Spirits of
the war dead. For a moment there, and I'm sure there are people out there who will take this for face value. For a moment there, I was like, well, if this movie is his dream, maybe the entire movie is this like kind of like personal hell.
Oh my gosh, I might have turned against them. That's maybe one step above the it was all a dream trope that nobody likes anymore because almost nobody can make that work.
But it's an interesting thing to tackle. Like, what if, and I'm not saying this is not how I take the movie. What if this movie was hell, or he thought it was hell? What becomes of the ending then? This is a hypothetical.
It's an IDW comic, Godzilla in Hell. That's the sequel. No, I'm kidding. I think this wouldn't work in a Japanese context, but if that was the case, I would be more likely to call it purgatory.
No, that doesn't work in a
Japanese
context. That doesn't work in
this because that's not, purgatory is not part of Japanese culture. Right. Whether it's Shintoism, Buddhism, or whatever, that's not in there. And Christianity is maybe 1% of the population. So that's not going to be in this.
All right. I mean, it's an interesting kind of fan theory, kind of like the fan theory that Godzilla versus Hedorah, Ken is just imagining the monsters.
Imagining the whole thing,
The monsters are just a representation of the actual pollution issue in Japan.
Right, yeah. I've heard that take too.
So it's interesting where you go from here because while Shikishima's war is over, Noriko still has radiation poisoning of some sort. She's been infected with something. We don't know. And Godzilla is inevitably going to come back. Not just because of sequel bait, but because as long as war exists, he will be back at this point.
Yeah, it's like Fallout said, war never changes.
Godzilla will always be there when Japan is considering these issues, right? Like the conversation that Dr. Noda had early on about like this country has been so fruitless with life, careless with life and whatnot. Well, it was Godzilla that made them consider that, right? GMK, people woke up in that movie because Godzilla returned. Shin Godzilla, people figured out that, there's too much red tape surrounding the decision-making process of protecting their people because Godzilla came. Godzilla is always going to be this sort of metaphoric specter for Japan to get their act together in the post-war. And unfortunately, that lasts forever. So it's interesting to see another Godzilla movie. At the very end, the heart beating and whatnot, the husk regenerating, he's going to come back because there's more issues to be resolved. Maybe not issues for Shikishima, but somewhere.
Although you and I did theorize about what might be interesting for some sequels would be if it took place, it followed the same characters, but it took place at other key points in history.
Different time periods.
Like one could be in the 60s at the height of the Cold War.
Yeah.
One could be in the 80s.
I would love that.
You know, but we're always following the same characters. So we can actually see Akiko grow up and things like that. But it could be like Shikishima feels like Godzilla follows him everywhere.
Yeah.
You know,
for some issue or another.
Yeah.
My thought process is actually, you know, I know I mentioned the 60s, but I do think that a potential sequel taking place in the mid-1950s would be excellent. Not simply because, you know, Godzilla was 54, but like because that was also the height of the Pacific nuclear tests.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think there's more to say about that, but I think it would be an interesting position to put this universe in. You know, we already know there is a Godzilla. How does he react to all these nuclear tests going off and stuff like that now? And it would be kind of an interesting thing to.
Yeah, it would be. And you know, since we're on the subject of Godzilla, maybe we should actually talk about Godzilla at least for a little bit.
Of
but
course.
you know, it's interesting we're talking about how he's portrayed in this and how he's used metaphorically and all that. But and you mentioned this is what prompted me to look this up in my notes. You talked about how the MonsterVerse is portraying the monsters as monsters, and Yamazaki has gone on record as saying that he thinks what makes Godzilla work in Japanese films is that he's like half monster, half god.
Right. And I think that's still ambiguous here.
Yeah, it still is. Even though there's a lot more scientific explanations given for him in this.
Yeah, but it's kind of like I said, Shikishima definitely sees him as a specter of the people he got killed on Odo Island. And something not letting him rest, not find peace because he believes because of his quote unquote failures in the war. I think, you know, it's funny, this origin is kind of a mixture of the Showa and the Heisei era because the Proto-Godzilla, and I didn't even catch this the first time I watched it. It was the second time I caught that the Proto-Godzilla came out of the ocean onto Odo Island. I just thought he lived on Odo Island. And so that kind of goes back to the Showa era Godzilla, where he's just an aquatic creature, kind of living deep underwater, who was awakened.
Which goes back to a very classic mythological perception of the sea as this big unknowable thing.
Yeah,
it is the unknown. It represents the unknown, and if there are sea monsters coming out of it, it's because who knows what's down there?
Who knows what's down there? How did it survive? How did it get there? Why is it here now? We don't know these answers, and that's what kind of also gives it this kind of almost godlike, omnipotent sort of feel.
And I bring that up because I have a quotation here from Yamazaki where he talked about this subject, and he said, quote, "There is a concept in Japan called tatarigami." I hope I said that right.
Yeah, I read this.
With, you know, spirits that bring calamity. There are good gods and there are bad gods. Godzilla is half monster, but it's also half god.
Half god, right.
Yeah. And I also saw that term, if I remember correctly, I don't have it in my notes, but I saw that come up when I was researching Kamikaze pilots as well. Yeah, I know, right?
Interesting connection. So that being said, we have this creature who's just this kind of like underwater. What's it called? An intermediary creature from. That's what they said they outlined it as in the original 1954 movie between land going and sea going creatures. And then he gets hit with Castle Bravo and mutates like the Heisei Godzilla mutated from the Godzilla source. So it's like a sort of a combination of both.
Oh no, and this was Crossroads, not Bravo.
Oh, that's right. It was Crossroads. Thank you.
Yeah, not Castle Bravo. I thought you were talking about 54 for a second.
No,
that one was Castle Bravo.
It was Crossroads here, and then he gets mutated. So we have kind of a combination of the two origins, and I thought that was kind of interesting because in almost every incarnation, Godzilla is just this natural creature who's been awakened and irradiated, or he's been mutated from another creature, and here it's both. You know,
is
this both? Yeah. So I liked that We have a Godzilla who has not skipped chest day again. That was one of my biggest.
He's got them Schwarzenegger pecs.
Yeah, it was like, I think you and I, we were watching Godzilla versus King Ghidorah last night, and I was like, man, it's good to have a Godzilla who knows how to bench press again. That's nice. I was like, Shin Godzilla, I mean, he's got like skin hanging off his ribs. Monsterverse Godzilla.
But he did not skip leg day.
You know, that's true. He got those hip thrusts going. You got the Monsterverse Godzilla who kind of just looks like someone's like standing an alligator up on his back legs.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't really look like a chest really. So, but here we got Godzilla who's back in the gym, which was nice to see again.
Design, it has a lot of design elements from various incarnations. It's got some Heisei in there. It's got some Monsterverse in there.
A lot of Heisei.
Yeah.
A lot of Heisei in there, yeah. I don't think enough people talk about this, but I really like how pronounced his spines are.
And I love what they do with the spines. This has, okay.
Oh, the nuclear
breath. Okay, we need to talk about this because I will tell you right now, I've seen some very dramatic uses of the atomic breath over the course of this franchise. Mm-hmm. For a long time, I actually thought that 2014, the Monsterverse, because Gareth Edwards made us wait the whole dang movie.
For it. And
then he unleashes it, and it's his big dang hero moment.
Yeah.
And it's a fist pumping one. It gets cheers out of crowds. Mm-hmm. You know, it's exciting. Shin Godzilla makes it horrifying. When we finally see it, and and that, like I said, so there's different filmmakers have approached it differently how they want to do it. This one goes back to being horrifying, but it has the suspenseful buildup that Gareth Edwards had with Godzilla 2014, but it feels like it's kind of cranked to another level because we get this upward panning shot from the tip of the tail all the way up to his head, and where it starts to glow, but it goes up. But as it goes up on the spines, which we're used to seeing, they pop up.
They jut out of.
They jut out like it's a threat display. And shout out to my listener, frequent guest, and patron, Damon Noyes, who at this point is practically an executive producer on this podcast because he is so generous on Patreon. He pointed out, and I never thought of this when the trailer that revealed that was on. It's like the rods in a nuclear reactor.
Yeah.
Popping up. And then once the energy is released, they go back down.
Mm-hmm. That when you told me that, I was oh, okay, that's where they're going with it.
Yeah. But then
it's gotta be.
Yeah, so we have all of that, but then we have Godzilla like actually taking in a breath to unleash this. So which we've seen that where he's breathing, but we see the energy start to build in his mouth. Like he has this big mouth open in some shots when he's doing it, like at the end, where he's absolutely horrifying when he opens his mouth and then the plane goes in. Mm-hmm. It's almost like he can unhinge that jaw like a Shin Godzilla, to a certain, except not with the weird one where it's like where the sides come out.
Yeah,
but it's just like he can open up very wide, and then we see the energy glowing out of his mouth, and then he unleashes it, and it happens. It's fast, it is violent, and it is almost instant. And then it's like an actual nuclear bomb goes off. It's again GMK, and every time it happens, and it only happens, I think it's 3 times, and he tries it for a 4th.
Right.
And every time it happens, it's a little different, and it's horrifying every time. And one of the things I thought was brilliant about the film is because we see what it can do. So when we get to the end, and he's charging it up to blow up the entire fleet of boats, we are freaking out.
Right, because there's absolutely no way they have any chance.
And they make that abundantly clear. It's like, we can't survive that. Like, they see him do it to a decoy, and they're all like, screw this. No.
So, when we see the beam and, like, go off in Ginza, you notice how, like, as it shoots, it's not even touching buildings and it's blowing them away.
Yeah.
Like, blowing a path out. And once it does finally touch down, then you have your nuclear symbolism right there. You have the shockwave that blows all these people away and absolutely demolishes the buildings the way it does, and Godzilla roaring at the mushroom cloud that he's created, almost as if like it's uneasy alliance he has with it. You know, that was the moment I thought that this movie almost slipped up with Godzilla, because I didn't want Godzilla to, you know, Godzilla's always been pictured as like not always, but usually is said to be a victim of the bomb as well. And at first I thought it was almost like a partnership he had with the nuclear like mushroom cloud he's created and stuff, like the visual of that. And it had me a little concerned, but then it was almost like, I mean, Godzilla's enraged this entire movie. There's nothing he's not.
Has to be probably the most consistently angry Godzilla I've seen in a long time. He's also the scariest I have ever seen him. Part of that help was with early on with Proto Godzilla, since he's smaller. You know, he's maybe only twice the size of a T-Rex. Okay, if that, and so that's why he's able to, like, he can chomp down on half of a man's body and just throw them with his mouth.
And he's just violent. Like, anytime he shoots,
and lots of low-angle camera shots, so we're really feeling small next to him. Even against Proto Godzilla, we the audience are feeling small, and he's so vicious that we're like, there's nothing like. If you see him, you are screwed.
Right.
You know, don't make one bad move or you're done. So that really helps it as well.
And so I was kind of relieved that he still looked not victorious, but rather pissed when he sees this mushroom cloud he created. You know, it's like this kind of like defiant roar against something that he is or a part of now, like the legacy he's a part of. So I was a little worried it was too much of the two being in cahoots, but I felt that the imagery worked pretty well, especially considering just how violently enraged he was this whole movie. And I think those who have been, you know, a common criticism of recent Japanese Godzillas is that he's been pretty tame all the way through, pretty static.
Not here.
You won't see that.
He is relentless.
Yeah, he really is.
This.
He really is.
If he wants you dead, he will find you.
I would say this is the most violent and horrific he's been since the GMK. Again, that may be some inspiration he took from GMK. Yamazaki took from GMK, but like Godzilla in that movie was also relentless and violent, and here is just cranked up to 11.
I mean, especially in that boat chase scene. I mean, if you thought you needed a bigger boat,
right? You need multiple now. So, and you mentioned earlier where the mine blew up part of his like face and whatnot.
The scar it was still there.
Yeah, the scar remained the entire time. And I remember I could only think of, and I haven't looked at it since then. I remember a lot of people complaining about the paint on the Monster Arts figure for this Godzilla. And I want to go back and look at it and see if like they mistaken some of the paint for the scar.
That might have been it. Yeah. So I mean, man, I know we could talk for hours about this, but there's a few other things I want to make sure we hit. We've talked a bit about the special effects already.
Yeah.
And
they were good.
Yeah, they were good. Those were supervised by Yamazaki. Like
Yamazaki.
This should be mentioned. This is probably the most auteur Godzilla movie in years. You and I talked about that. There's really only a handful that we can.
Well, Shin Godzilla was.
Shin Godzilla was. These don't happen very often. It's like I think we said 54, GMK, Final Wars, believe it or not, Shin, and this.
We might need to explain Final Wars.
And Hedorah.
Hedorah, and Hedorah because of, I mean, Tanaka wasn't there to supervise it. So,
but the reason we include Final Wars is because if you've seen Kitamura's other movies, it is undoubtedly a Kitamura movie.
Yeah, he was kind of let off the leash for that one.
Yeah, he really was let off the leash.
With the exception of the extreme cursing from the...
Yeah, Toho said no to that one.
No. We can't. We don't have enough dragon daggers for that.
No, we don't. But that scene is so hilarious because I'm like, oh, that's what you think New York is like?
Yeah.
Anyway, I've got a Final Wars episode coming eventually. But
yeah, I mean,
so
whenever you play with a franchise movie, every director is going to have some stipulations.
Yeah, but
I think
Yamazaki here, he wrote it. Took him 3 years to write it. Part of that was the pandemic, but because they were
Freebie.
supposed. Yeah, he developed the script for a year, and then the pandemic happened. It's like, Yay! And then he spent 2
Yeah.
more years working on it before they actually started production. And he directed the special effects, directed the movie itself. Like, his fingerprints are all over this. It's everything.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's really anything he didn't touch when, traditionally speaking, which is why Shinji Higuchi gets co-credit for directing with Anno for Shin Godzilla, because Anno handled the quote-unquote drama segments, and Higuchi handled the special effects sequences, which is how it was always done. You know, Honda, back in the 60s, he would do the human stuff, and Tsuburaya handled the special effects.
You and I have had this conversation before, but I've often been a proponent of, you know, these movies should be listed with two directors, you know, Honda and Tsuburaya, or Fukuda and Nakano, because a lot of people don't understand. I see a lot of people mistaken Honda's work in special effects sequences when in fact it was Tsuburaya who had full control of those scenes and often wouldn't let Honda see the shots until he was done with them.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really a movie made by, you know, led by two different men doing these things.
With the exception of All Monsters Attack, because Honda had to.
Honda did do the special effects for that one, yes.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
And Honda did have a little bit more of his mitts in Terror of Mechagodzilla, only because Terror of Mechagodzilla is one of the few movies that shared the same director of photography for both the special effects.
Yeah.
And the live action stuff. So,
and interestingly, something that I found looking up some quotations from Yamazaki about this is this actually made me kind of happy. I'm looking back on the movie now, like trying to see where it is. He was being interviewed along with Shinji Higuchi, and he actually said, "Oh yeah, we took inspiration from Gamera 3 for the effects." The destruction scenes in particular.
There you go.
Yeah. And I'm just sitting here thinking, it's like, is he just saying that because Higuchi is right there? I mean, what a compliment for Yamazaki to say, like, oh yeah, we took inspiration from Gamera 3 for this.
You mentioned earlier that Yamazaki has, you know, kind of taken the best parts of the best of the series. Why not take from Gamera 3 one of the best of the franchise?
I was gonna say, I mentioned potential Mount Rushmore of kaiju films. Gamera 3 is one of them for me.
Yeah, for me too. I mean, I don't know what my Mount Rushmore of kaiju
I can tell you
I
can tell you the three. If we say Mount Rushmore has 4, the 3 I would definitely have on there are Kong 33, Godzilla 54, and Gamera 3, because those are, I think, the best of their respective franchises and had huge effects on the genre.
Yeah, definitely.
Undeniable effects on the genre.
Yeah,
but again, we may not know what this is going to do in the future. But you know, those are the effects. Let's talk about the music.
Okay. Yeah.
You and I, we've been listening to the soundtrack a lot. Yeah, and you know, so we should definitely talk about this. So our composer here is Naoki Sato, not that Sato. It's a different Sato.
We now have 2 Satos.
We now have 2 Satos. And this guy has been doing a lot of work. He's done a lot of work in anime. He's done a lot of work with Yamazaki. He's a frequent collaborator. And looking at some of his past credits, there's a lot of stuff that he's done, including things that are near and dear to one or both of us. He worked on all 5 of the live-action Rurouni Kenshin movies. I'm a huge fan of that franchise. He worked on something that's near and dear to you and your sister, Dragon Ball Super Superhero. And he's also worked on Pretty Cure, whatever that's worth, Eureka 7, Stand By Me, Doraemon.
Yeah.
Yep. And he's previously collaborated with Yamazaki on Space Battleship Yamato and Parasite Parts 1 and 2 and The Great War of Archimedes.
And the Always trilogy.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely the Always trilogy, which actually is where he first rendition of Ifkabe's Godzilla theme was.
Which that comes back in here a couple of times, and which is at this point it's practically a tradition. Like ever since Destroya, which was the last one he worked on, they just throw it in there where it's appropriate at least once.
Yeah.
And
well, it's tradition if your name is anything other than Hulkenborg, but you know,
I mean, Alexander Desplat didn't have it either.
Yeah, but at least he made music.
Anyway, Sato. You know,
I have a cheerleader in the back here I'm looking at right now.
How did he get in the green room? But anyway, you'd said that this is more of an atmospheric score.
Right.
Because when the Ifukube music comes on, it really stands out.
On a standalone listen especially, it sticks out like a sore thumb. Like it almost doesn't fit until you see the movie, right? Because everything else, other than the Ifukube stuff, is very atmospheric. There aren't really melodic themes. It's mostly just sounds to create tension most of the time. And I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of those type of scores. And this is not one of my more favorite scores of the recent Godzilla output. That doesn't mean I don't like it. It just I do prefer Shin Godzilla's score.
I think I think this score works better in context of the movie than it does as a standalone.
100%.
And there are only certain composers and certain soundtracks, I think, that are able to evolve past that. John Williams is a great example of a composer who makes music that you can listen to out of context and just enjoy listening to it. And Jerry Goldsmith, there's a lot of great composers out there.
If you want to bring up Jerry Goldsmith again, we can do that right now. That's fine. We can
Jerry Goldsmith.
What a beautiful, beautiful man. I'm just a bigger fan of more melody, especially these days. I was a huge fan of Hans Zimmer, but now that there's so many Hans Zimmer clones out there,
including your new favorite one,
you're really asking for it. You're really
I get it.
I
get it. You think I get it. You think his music is junky.
I'm leaving. My thing is like Ken Sawada, who did the soundtrack for Singular Point, maybe some of my favorite Godzilla music of the last 10 years or so. Honestly.
The theme song is a banger.
The theme song is a banger, but the actual orchestral stuff in it is amazing. And his rendition of the Ifukube themes are great too. And that's something I was a little disappointed with as well. I loved Bear McCreary's score for Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Might be the best score in the Monsterverse.
It is. There's not a might. It is. and he played a lot with Godzilla's themes in that. He did some stuff with it that I really wanted to hear done with the theme. And I was hoping Sato would have done the same. That isn't to say what he does. Yeah, he plays it pretty straight. And it still worked in context of what was going on, though.
The one track of his that I think stood out, but only because I think it was used effectively in the trailer, is the one that plays the scene that I remember it playing in most vividly, because I think it played at least twice in the movie, was when we see the plane for the first time. It's that do-do-do, 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 do-do-do.
I believe what you're talking about is the honor theme.
Yeah.
Yeah. Normally when a composer tackles Godzilla, they use Ifukube's theme. They have two Godzilla themes. They have Ifukube's theme, and then they have kind of their own Godzilla theme. Like
Michiru Oshima.
Right. Oshima in Megagears had her theme, but then the Ifukube theme would play. You'd have Hattori, he had his own Godzilla theme in Space Godzilla, and another one he wrote in Godzilla 2000, but you'd also hear Ifukube's theme in those as well. Here, there's this kind of dreaded theme that underscores Godzilla as well, and I think you hear that the most during the first kind of interaction with the mutated Godzilla, the fully grown Godzilla in the water, chasing them, kind of the very Jaws moment going on. You also hear it immediately after an Ifukube theme ends during the final confrontation when they're trying to pull him up, but he stops. He pulls through his water wings, essentially. And
he chews through it.
Yeah.
I will admit, when that first happened for a hot second, because I couldn't quite tell what that was in the water, I'm like, did he chew his own arm off or something? Which would have been wild if he did that.
Gamera 3'd himself. But again, these are themes that are very atmospheric. They don't have a lot of melody to them. It's a buildup of this dread and whatnot, which on a standalone listen, I don't find that interesting, even though I'm likely going to listen to it again very soon. I don't find that interesting, but works incredibly well for the visuals happening on screen.
Right.
And so I can't really fault it for doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is enhance the moment on screen.
Exactly.
It's just a shame that I don't have a little bit more of that kind of Ken Sawada, you know, swinging, football marching band kind of stuff going on
right.
to listen to on its own.
Right, for sure. For sure.
But that wouldn't fit this movie.
No, it wouldn't. I think going for an atmospheric sound is probably better for that because it's supposed to accentuate the drama. It's not supposed to draw attention to itself. And even though I've pointed out things like John Williams or Jerry Goldsmith or I'm trying to remember his name, the composer for Back to the Future. We were talking about that also. Alan Silvestri.
Yeah.
Who also made the most memorable score in the MCU because he's Alan Silvestri.
He really did.
Because he's Alan Silvestri. What they did actually worked on both levels. It works as a standalone listen, and it works within the context of the film.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't draw too much attention to yourself, but it might also be testaments to just how good those movies are.
Maybe. And I don't want to say, no one can enjoy atmospheric music either. I have plenty of friends who are composers or involved in music who do enjoy, horror movie soundtracks, which are very kind of droning, atmospheric. Godzilla Raised Again is a great example for a very atmospheric soundtrack.
Return to Godzilla.
The Return of Godzilla? No. I think there's
really?
more. Yeah, I think there's more.
Okay, I'll give you that. But it also it has atmospheric tracks
bombastic as hell, man.
Well, yeah, at points, but it has really atmospheric tracks in it as
here
well.
Here and there.
Yeah. And I think we would be remiss. I'm surprised we didn't talk about this sooner. We should talk about the title. I've had to explain the title to people because it is a bit of a strange title. There's a part of me that wonders if Toho chose this title because they didn't want the fan theory title to be real.
Godzilla Zero.
Zero because it's before all of them. Mm-hmm. And so they say, well, screw that. We're going to go -1. We're going to subtract 1.
Yeah.
It's kind of puntastic. I'm surprised we haven't made more jokes about it than we have. I messed with somebody when it was post Godzilla -1 spoilers on here. And I said, I was surprised to find out it's actually about a math equation. It's
funny.
I need no lip from you, Jimmy. Just because you're better at math than me. It's a really Evangelion Hideaki Anno sounding title.
Oddly, yes.
Yeah.
Oddly, yes.
Because you look at the Ava Rebuild movies and they all have wacky titles like that. It's Evangelion
1 or
Evangelion 1.11. You cannot advance. I'm probably combining several of them at that point. And the last one is called Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0. Which, when you watch the movie, that actually makes sense. But when you look at it on the surface, you're like, huh? But the concept here, and it's funny, the trailer actually spells this out when we got the official title, which is, and what I like about what this movie does is that it doesn't spell that out for you, but by watching it, this is exactly what this movie is about, which is that after the war, Japan is reduced to nothing.
Yep.
Or zero. And then just when they think it can't get any worse, Godzilla shows up and basically kicks them while they're down.
He is the -1.
He is the -1.
It's funny you bring that up. I have had to explain that to a lot of people too, especially, online. God forbid, anyone there understand anything. But it was interesting after we got out of the theater with my family. My dad goes, after seeing that movie, I absolutely understand the title. I was like, really?
Good.
He was like, yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Well, which is funny. One of the funniest reviews I found, because I found a bunch of reviews from other Japanese filmmakers, just filmmakers in general, who have some sort of connection to Godzilla or whatnot, who are just praising the snot out of this movie. Like Anno saw it, he liked it. Gareth Edwards said he saw it and was jealous. Because he's like, this is what a Godzilla movie should be, which is, I appreciate hearing from him.
I feel like Edwards, this is probably the type of movie he wanted to make.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dougherty, director of King of the Monsters 2019, he really liked it. He's a self-professed fanboy.
Yeah, Dougherty is a Godzilla fanboy, though, so that, almost to a fault.
Yeah, he called it amazing. The funniest one I found was from Hideo Kojima, creator of Metal Gear.
Oh, yeah. I read this one.
Yeah. He hailed the film feeling that, quote, Godzilla, the plot, the VFX, Fukabe's music, Mr. Hamabe's appearance, and the applause afterward were, quote, nothing but pluses, joking that the result was plus 120 points, so I want to change the title. Godzilla plus 120.
And Kojima is a longtime Godzilla fan, too.
But really quick, because this will lead very nicely into the Toku topic on Kamikaze pilots, but we found out after the movie that the plane that we've been talking about is actually real. And they
What's
say
it called again?
It's called a Shinden. The full name is a Kyushu J7W.
Okay. It was funny because after we got out of that movie, my dad, he used to work with planes. And I asked him, I was like, how likely is that plane in that movie? He was actually very likely. In fact, Honda has developed some of those planes before.
Yep.
And then when you told me those things were real, I was like, well.
Yeah, they were real. Now, the movie said there were 4 of them. There were actually only 2.
Were they both prototypes?
They were prototypes.
Okay.
And here's the interesting thing. The one that's in this movie was built in secret by Toho. And then after they were done with it, they donated it to the Takiarai Peace Memorial Museum in Chikuzen, Fukuoka.
Memorial.
Fukuoka.
Why do you think it was done in secret?
I'm not entirely sure, but they did it under. They did. Well, I don't know. They said they did it anonymously and didn't reveal it until after the movie was released. So maybe they're trying to keep it secret for the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay.
To avoid spoilers. Looking at it now, that might have been what they did. Mm-hmm. But like I said, this was a real plane developed right at the end of the war. And it was made as a response to the B-29 Superfortress, which, if you know your World War II history, Superfortresses were gigantic.
Huge. They were massive.
They were massive. They were armed to the teeth, and they were bombers.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they were also being used in the fire bombings on the Japanese mainland.
And my dad, my uncle, and my grandfather were all very, very involved in planes at one point in time. So that thing was used. It was one reason it was used is because its fuel consumption was not as great as other planes.
Yeah. So it was meant to be, they kind of hinted at it in the movie. It's supposed to be a very maneuverable interceptor. But like I said, only 2 of them were made. They did consider making a jet engine version, which is what we get in the movie, because this is 2 years later. So we can just assume that they did develop the jet engine version. And on August 3rd, 1945, and if you know your dates, oh boy, that's really close to the end of the war. Mm-hmm. The prototype, that was its first flight, and it was with Saruno at the controls, and it took off from the Mushiroda airfield. There were 2 more test flights after this for a total flight time of 45 minutes. You want to know the crazy part? Those other 2 test flights were on the same days as the nuclear bombings.
Well, nothing like a successful flight on the day that you surrender, I guess. Well, we won't be needing this anymore.
Well, yeah. But when they were doing it, they said that they found some issues with it. It had a torque pull to the starboard, but they didn't have enough time to do anything with it, because the war ended. But here's the other wild part. There was only 2 of them. One was scrapped. The other one was taken by the Americans. It was claimed by the U.S. Navy Technical Air Intelligence Unit in late 1945. They dismantled it and shipped it to America. Although my source here says some sources claim that the USN took the first built, while others state that it was the second. And then it says that one that survived was reassembled, but never flown in the United States. And then it was transferred to the Smithsonian in 1960. Its forward fuselage is currently on display at the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center Annex at the Dulles Airport of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. Quote, according to the NASM, miscellaneous parts are stored at Building 7C at the older storage/annex facility, the Garber facility in Sweetland, Maryland. End quote.
Interesting.
So yeah, one got scrapped, the other one got taken by the Americans.
And now there's a replica sitting in the Peace Museum in Japan. Interesting.
Yep. So with that, we'll transition to the Toku topic. And boy, this is going to be interesting. You know, I'm the kaiju guy now thanks to the Monster Island Film Vault, but before that I was the superhero guy. I wonder if there's a way I could combine those.
Hey, Nathan.
Travis from Kaiju Weekly?
Yeah, I'm here because I need a co-host for a new Toku Heroes podcast.
Oh? What's it called?
Henshin!
Standing by. Complete.
That's right, heroes. We are the Henshin Men, a tokusatsu superheroes appreciation podcast.
Join us as we watch several episodes of a TV series from the wide world of Henshin heroes and discuss their merits and cultural significance.
Starting with one of my all-time favorites, the original Kamen Rider from 1971.
We'll give out awards for things like the best action scenes and crazy what the Henshin moments.
So hear us every Monday in your favorite podcatcher to get your weekly Rider kicks.
Gotta go, because we only have a minute to Henshin it.
Kenny, I'm starting a podcast. Recruit me a co-host with attitude.
What the heck? I thought we put that teleporter in storage. Michael? Next time you want me on Kaiju Weekly, tell Jimmy to.
Drop the act, Nathan. This is not the Monster Island Film Vault.
Okay, fine. But what's going on?
I'm having you join me on The Power Trip, a journey through the Power Rangers franchise. It's a podcast version of the article series I'm writing for Kaiju Ramen magazine.
Oh, interesting.
We'll spend a year analyzing the Power Rangers franchise, dedicating an episode to each season and movie.
Ah, I see. So we'll be doing an overview and talking about them in broad strokes.
Exactly. We'll discuss Ranger teams, the villains, the theme songs, and so much more.
Can we give out fun awards for stuff like the best fight scene and the craziest moments like I do on Henshin Men?
You bet.
More phenomenal. When do we start?
We drop episodes every 2 weeks starting Tuesday, January 4th, 2022.
You know what that means, Michael.
It's morphin' time.
Shigeko, are you well? It is now a month since that day. The happy dream is over. Tomorrow I will dive my plane into an enemy ship. I will cross the river into the other world, taking some Yankees with me. When I look back, I see that I was very cold-hearted to you. After I had been cruel to you, I used to regret it. Please forgive me. When I think of your future and the long life ahead, it tears at my heart. Please remain steadfast and live happily. After my death, please take care of my father for me. I, who have lived for the eternal principles of justice, will forever protect this nation from the enemies that surround us. Commander of the Air Unit Eternity, Haruo Araki. That was the final letter of a Kamikaze pilot written to his wife. When I found that doing my research, I found it highly relevant for what we're talking about here. From what I was able to read, no one exactly knows if he actually did it or not. It's believed that he either went through with the kamikaze attack or he got shot down. Nobody knows.
Many did get shot down.
Yeah, they did, which I will be getting into that. But one of the things I found out in that same article, first off, his wife actually was all for it. She was actually proud of it. She actually was quoted as saying, I thought it was natural that Haruo would die. It would have been shameful for him to go on living. And she went on to say, it was for Japan. It was to preserve and protect the country. We were sending our loved ones off to die. It was the least we could do on the home front, because she worked at a factory, as part of the war effort. And she finally said, when talking about his sacrifice, and if he managed to sink a ship, she said otherwise, he still lives at the bottom of the cold Okinawa Sea for nothing.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And I also found out from this article that the headbands that kamikaze pilots were famous for wearing, the white headbands with the red rising sun.
Those were the imperial symbol.
Yeah. Those were made by schoolgirls, Japanese schoolgirls, by pricking their fingers and using their own blood.
Oh, lovely. Hey, class, guess what we're doing today?
Try that with your students next year. So, guess what we're doing today after we run? Yes, I know that's a terrible joke.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, it's awful. So, for those who don't know, kamikaze pilots. Basically, to put it succinctly, one of my sources say, quote, in the later stages of the Second World War in the Pacific, Japan was faced with an overwhelming American naval power. Increasingly unable to make effective air attacks against American ships, Japanese forces turned to suicide attacks, using pilots flying aircraft laden with bombs as improvised missiles, in the hope of destroying Allied ships at the cost of the aircraft and the pilot's life. Suicide attackers were known as the kamikaze. And kamikaze comes from two different Japanese words. It's a portmanteau. From kami, which means divine or god or spirit, divinity, and kaze, which means wind. And this is actually an old word. It actually goes back to the 1200s. You know about this part of the story? No, okay. It originated from the, I hope I'm saying this right, the Makurakubota.
Let me see.
Yeah, it's right there.
Makurakotapa.
Yeah, it's a little hard to read.
Anyway, going on.
Yeah. Which was waka poetry, and it was modifying the word issei, and this all happened in 1281, and it was referring to typhoons that saved the country from Mongol invaders, and it was believed it was actually divine protection for the country of Japan.
I think as Westerners, we can probably not fathom how controversial kamikaze pilots were, or the concept of them were, and certainly not, I think we are both a culture and a time removed from how controversial that was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which we'll unpack here a little bit. But what's funny is that most of the suicide pilots didn't think of themselves as a divine wind. They just thought of themselves as part of a special attack force, which was called the Tokubetsu Kogekitai, or it's just abbreviated Toko. And we'll get into what went into making a kamikaze pilot. This was a desperate tactic to halt the advancing Allies, and it was also seen as an honorable escape from humiliation. That's because individual ceremonial suicide was just an accepted part of Japanese culture. If you've heard terms like seppuku, harakiri, it's the bushido, the code of the samurai. That's what they would do.
But at this point, it was the higher ups trying to convince their soldiers that this was honorable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and to surrender was dishonorable.
Yeah,
and that's why the Japanese had contempt for prisoners of war. And a line here from one of my sources, quote, Japanese soldiers believed that when they fell on the field of battle, they would become kami, or gods, and join the nation's spirits at the Shinto shrine in Yasukuni in Tokyo. That's a controversial thing too, my word. That's something I may have to unpack at some point on this show. Hence the typical farewell from the members of the Shimpu, or Divine Wind. That was another name that they used. Special Attack Corps was, I'll meet you at the Yasukuni Shrine. They would have elaborate sake parties before they did this. Oh, no, occasionally. It says they were not held primarily as a means of fortifying the spirit, but as a symbol of the anticipated act of self-immolation for the glory of the emperor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. it's kind of weird thinking about this. That actually makes me think of that party scene in Raids Again, which then ends with kind of a kamikaze run.
Incidental.
Yeah, very incidental. And what's weird is that there Japanese pilots would actually be angered or astonished that Americans would think that kamikaze pilots needed special training, because they didn't, because it's just leading to their death. One guy that I saw come up frequently when I was doing my research on this was a guy named Captain Inoguchi, apparently a big source for a lot of this stuff. And he said the kamikaze spirit is uniformly Japanese. That's why they would be surprised that anyone would think they have to be trained to do this. But it wasn't just that. The kamikaze pilots were not very good pilots. This happened late in the war, and all of their good pilots were getting whittled down in combat. So they were just bringing in all these new guys, and they had to get them out there fast. So they would basically just train them to take off, fly at a distance, and crash. Formation flying was optional.
That's interesting because -1 paints Shikishima as a pretty decent pilot, you know? Mm-hmm. So it seems like there may have been some embellishment there in the movie.
Perhaps. But a lot of people think of the kamikaze pilots as zealots, and some of them were, but a lot of them were coerced into doing it. Made them think that they had to do it out of obligation rather than enthusiasm. But some of them were volunteers, although some of them were shamed into volunteering. That would have been interesting to find out, how did Shikishima get into this? Was he one of the true believers, or was he one of the ones who got coerced into doing it?
I would think that based on how the character acts, my assumption would be that he was coerced. Mm-hmm. Because from the very get-go, the opening of the movie, I mean, it's not 2 minutes in, it's established that he didn't want to die.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. And in the end, and I'm telegraphing a little bit here, in the end, these tactics proved fruitless. Mm-hmm. But one thing it did do is it took the Allies by surprise, because they never would have considered something like this. Because the Allies, as Western nations, come from the influence of Judeo-Christian values, which believes in the sanctity of life. So the idea of suicide attacks is completely foreign to them. So it caught them off guard. And then for a while, they didn't quite know what to do. But for what I read here, the word suicide doesn't have negative connotations. We've already established a bit in Japan. In fact, there are 2 different versions of it, which is jiketsu, or self-determination, and jisai, or self-judgment. And, quote, it suggests an honorable or laudable act done in the public interest, end quote. So there's no ethical or religious taboo against it in Japan.
I'd like to add to that, though, that a lot of Pacific ships toward the end of the war, you know, the resources to build these planes became less and less. Mm-hmm. I mean, some of these planes were being built out of aluminum, all right? Mm-hmm. And the kamikaze pilots that would hit the ship, some of them weren't even bombed. Like, they didn't have bombs attached to them. And so they would hit the ship, and it would just be like flames sitting on top of the ship. And they just go, shh. My grandfather was a soldier in the Pacific War. He was actually stationed on the Marshall Islands, Guam. And he was actually on a ship at one point where it was kamikaze.
Do you remember which ship?
I don't remember what ship. I don't at all. I don't think it was I don't think it was a relevant one. But, like, it was kamikaze, but it did no damage. It was just kind of a husk of fire there, and they came over with a fire extinguisher.
Oh, wow.
And kicked it out.
I'm guessing it was probably a carrier or a loaded transport. Those were their favorite targets.
Probably a transport.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be on a carrier.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be on a carrier.
Yeah, but that was their typical targets. They went after other things, but those were their favorites. Yeah. The origins of the kamikaze can be traced to Luzon in the Philippines in October 1944. And that is where we meet Vice Admiral Tajiro Onishi. And he was the recently appointed commander of the Japanese naval forces in the Philippines. And he laid out this whole plan to take a meager 30 planes to defend the Japanese fleet from an oncoming American attack from Leyte for a week. 30 planes against an entire fleet for a week. And he said, quote, "In my opinion, there is only one way of assuring that our meager strength will be effective at a maximum degree. That is to organize suicide attack units composed of Zero fighters armed with 250-kilogram bombs, with each plane to crash dive into the enemy carrier. Ellipses. What do you think? End quote. After some silence and then discussion, Commander Tamai, a senior pilot, volunteered his unit. The name of the unit was Shimpu, another word for kamikaze.
I echo the thoughts of many of those pilots probably when I say hole.
Thanks, Jet. We needed that. Yeah, and then the first actual kamikaze attack, although there's a little bit of dispute, it's a little bit funny, the dispute with this, but the first attack was carried out October 25th, 1944, which sank the USS St. Lo, L-O, and damaged the USS Kitkun Bay, and USS White Plains. They didn't sink, though. There were exaggerated reports by the Japanese claiming that all of 3 of those boats sank, and also some light cruisers, but this was done to make it look more effective, obviously. And then the program continued from there. And the most notable place where it happened was the Battle of Okinawa, which the bloodiest battle in World War II went on for about 2 or 3 months. They were extensively used in that one. Here's an interesting thing for you. Emperor Hirohito himself sent a message to these pilots, and it was read to them through Onishi. Strap in. It's 2 sentences. Was it necessary to go to this extreme? They certainly did a magnificent job.
I would like to add something real quick. Post-World War II, I know this is going to be shocking. Hirohito was not popular amongst the Japanese people.
No. But here's the funny thing. Reading this actually upset Onishi because he thought that the emperor in that first sentence was criticizing him and his tactics, which actually made him double down in his determination to prove their effectiveness. Jack says as he drinks from a cup that I wonder if it might be vodka and not water.
Pick a hell of a day to start drinking.
Who let Captain Gordon in? I'm just anyway. So you heard it a little bit. The primary aircraft that was used for this were the Zeros.
Yeah,
which might be probably the most iconic Japanese aircraft of all time.
Some of the most advanced during World War II as well.
Yeah. And they were used a lot in the early parts of the war, 41 and 42. They started being used in 1944 for the Kamikaze. But problem was that by that point, the Zero was outclassed by the Americans. Yeah. But it said as around 650 Zero fighters were expended, which was more than any other type. But then the Japanese developed a whole aircraft just for kamikaze attacks. It was called the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, which actually means cherry blossom.
Oh, no.
Yep, and I will unpack that a little bit later. So they started work on that in 1943, which was before the first attacks were carried out. And it came from a Japanese transport pilot named Mitsuo Ota. It says his designs originally went nowhere, but then in 1944, he was summoned to present his design to the Navy. And then from June 1944, after heavy aircraft losses in battle around the Mariana Islands, they started working on those planes. And they did test flights in October, right when they decided they were going to do this. And with a successful test flight, they made it was rocket powered. And they started making them in November
of
1944.
Okay.
Yeah. It's about 6 meters long, 5 meters wide. The rocket could reach speeds of 400 miles an hour. And in its final dive, when it dove down, it could reach 575 miles an hour, which is why they did it, because since they're that fast, they're hard to shoot down. But like I said, the name that means cherry blossom One of the guys I saw talking about this was a gentleman named Ian Kiguchi. And he said, quote, "The cherry blossom is a popular symbol in Japanese culture. Cherry blossom is beautiful, but its beauty is short-lived, and soon the petals fall from the trees or are blown away by the wind. For the Japanese, the cherry blossom has become a symbol for the fleeting nature of human life." End quote. Let that sink in a little bit.
Yeah.
At least at the time. I don't know if it's viewed that way now, but back then it was. Funny thing, the Americans also had a name for these pilots. They didn't call them kamikaze. I'm guessing that came later. They're called the aircraft Baka bombs.
Oh, oh no.
Yeah, because it's the Japanese word
Baka bomb
for foolish or idiot.
Yep.
Yes, and my pseudo sister's nickname for me. We're moving on. All right. But one of the Oka's biggest weaknesses is that it had a limited range. It had to be carted around by bombers. And then they had to launch it from the bomber. And the larger aircraft transporting it was vulnerable to interception. But once you let it go, it was, good luck shooting it down. But it wasn't just these pilots. There were other quote-unquote kamikaze corps that got established because of this. And then one was called the Kaiten, which was a manned suicide torpedo that was intended to sneak into American-held harbors and sink enemy ships at anchor. And then there was also explosive speedboats, which were called Shinyo or Seaquake. And they were plywood craft filled with explosives and driven by a crew of one or two into enemy ships as they came to the Japanese shore of a Japanese base. So it wasn't just there. And I also remember there were suicide soldiers as well during the island campaign. And they were famous for running out from cover, no guns, and they would just yell, "Banzai!" Mm-hmm. And American soldiers would panic and just gun them down, not knowing that they were unarmed. And it was a similar mindset that was being ingrained
the
into
kamikaze
them.
mindset.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But remember how I said this is a little, albeit admittedly a little bit funny. Remember how I said that the USS St. Lo is considered to be the first target of kamikaze?
Yeah.
Well, there's another one. They like to say they were the first. The HMAS Australia, which was an Australian heavy cruiser. No surprise, right? They say they were the first. And here's the thing. This ship was targeted so frequently by kamikaze. I think they said that this one ship, the Australia, was targeted, I think, at least 5 times, that it was nicknamed the Kamikaze Magnet. It was that and its near identical sister ship, which was the Shropshire, I should say. They never sank, though. But they said that they were targeted on October 21st, which is 4 days before the St. Lo.
Okay.
But the Kamikaze
Magnet. Now, it says they were targeted 5 times. Targeted 5 times the same day, or
no, just 5 times total over time.
Yeah, total. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
over time. Now, I did read another account where there was a swarm of, I'm trying to remember which ship it was. There was a swarm of kamikaze that went after, it was an American ship, and they managed to shoot down some of them, and then a couple of them missed, but then 6 of them hit. And this was in one go. So, 2,000 servicemen died in kamikaze attacks during the Battle of Okinawa, which was part of an operation called 10 Go. The plan was to sink so many American ships that the U.S. Fifth Fleet would withdraw and abandon its troops on Okinawa. Obviously, it didn't work. Yeah. And then between April and June, there were 400 kamikaze sorties in Okinawa. But here's the thing that was interesting. British aircraft carriers fared better against the kamikazes because they had armored flight decks. The American carriers were made of wood. And in some cases, the one I was mentioning, they got hit by 6. That one, it was loaded up with a bunch of planes and a bunch of fuel, so it was basically a floating Molotov.
Yeah, that one will last.
That one didn't go down, but man,
it didn't go down.
It didn't go down, but they had a crew of 3,000. I'm actually going to look it up here since I'm talking about it. But it had a crew of 3,000, and over 300 of them died, and then about 200 plus went missing. So the Allies had to come up with some defenses for this, obviously, because it caught them off guard. The key defense was combat air patrol by naval aircraft. They would try to intercept the Japanese aircraft before they reached Allied ships. Naval aircraft were also used in an attempt to suppress Japanese airfields. They would attack the Kamikaze as they took off, or they would bomb the runways. And then they also used destroyers as radar pickets. The problem was, even with these radar, that made them targets, but they would be positioned 20 miles out from the main fleet, and they would act as early warnings. And then, obviously, on the ships, they have anti-aircraft guns. Then they had damage control, which you were talking about, getting the hoses out and spraying it down. So, if they got hit, then they would respond as quickly as possible to mitigate the damage. And then there was a squadron of Oka. They were the Japanese 721st Naval Air Squadron, and this is just interesting because of the name. They're called the Jinrai Butai, which means Divine Thunderbolt Corps or Thunder Gods. Trying really hard to be cool there, I guess. But here's the thing. If there was a full-scale invasion of Japan, they were going to use the Kamikaze.
What, on the carriers for the invasion, or?
Yeah, let me read you from my source. Quote, in the event of an invasion of Japan proper, of course, the Japanese were determined to employ suicide tactics on a grand scale. Captain Fuchika's understanding was that the Japanese Army and Navy were prepared to expend 5,000 kamikaze aircraft between them to defend the homeland, and he believed the approximately 2/3 of that number would have found their targets. It was Captain Inaguchi's opinion, however, that inexperienced pilots and the lack of defense against American fighter planes would have precluded a higher proportion of hits than 1/9 or 1/10. Oh, it's 2/9 of their targets. I read that wrong.
Okay.
But yeah, 5,000 if there was a full-scale invasion. Now we'll talk about the results here. There's a lot that we could go into.
Yeah,
if you want to see my research notes, they'll be posted on Jimmy's blog, and you can look up the sources and read from all this, because there was a lot that I could have brought up, and I have to keep it relatively condensed on the show. But let's talk about the results of this. 2,314 planes dispatched, including escorts. 1,086 returned. For the 1,228 planes expended, they claimed 81 ships sunk and 195 damaged, for a total of 276 ships. But post-war records indicate the correct figures are 34 ships sunk, including 3 light carriers and 13 destroyers. Of the 195 ships the Japanese claimed as damaged, they actually amassed 288 ships, including 16 fleet aircraft carriers, 3 light carriers, and 17 escort carriers. And then there were the ones I mentioned, like the Australia and the USS Laffrey, that were hit repeatedly, but they never sank. So the Japanese claim of 276 sunk or damaged is understated. They actually hit 322 and sank 34. So among the damaged ships were 31 aircraft carriers of different types. And in some cases, like the USS Bunker Hill, the damage was severe enough to put the ship out of action for months. And
Stole it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and this whole thing cost 4,000 airmen. 4,000 deaths to kamikaze, deaths of Japanese airmen in kamikaze attacks. And they killed more than 7,000 Allied Navy personnel and wounded many more.
I think the only response I can give, I looked this up because I mentioned it in one of my articles on Deferential Wrath.
Which is real.
Is a story by Yukio Mishima, written. It was called The Voice of the Fallen Hero Spirits. And the story is essentially that the spirits of kamikaze pilots come back to Japan to essentially put the emperor on trial.
Oh my gosh. Hirohito?
Yeah, they put the emperor on trial and hold him responsible for Japan's ethical decadence.
Wow, I need to read this.
So that's kind of the artistic response to all the mayhem you just summed up there.
Yeah.
So,
but to summarize it, one final point. Why didn't it work? Well, according to Mr. Kikuchi, quote, the Japanese overestimated how many kamikaze would be able to evade Allied fighters and anti-aircraft guns. They overestimated the likelihood of direct hits against enemy ships and overestimated how much damage a crashing aircraft could do to a large warship. Because let's be honest.
they're not going to...
it's basically like throwing a rock at a car.
Yeah.
You'll damage it, but you're probably not going to take it out unless you have a really big rock and hit it in the right spot. The Japanese also overestimated how much impact the kamikaze would have on Allied strategic decision-making. They thought the psychological effect of their attacks would be so demoralizing that it would reduce the Americans' will to fight the war to the bitter end. They were wrong.
Yep.
So it was an act of desperation that was couched in the samurai concept of honorable death.
To get people to do it.
To get people to do it. And it's just one of those things when I look at it, and this is me making an interpretation of this, I look at it and I think this is the higher ups who were the true fanatics. You know, the likes of Tojo. They were the ones who were keeping Japan in the war. They were pressuring the emperor to keep the war effort going, even though the people were not wanting to do it. And he was burdened by the devastation to the country. But they kept him in. And that's what it looks like to me. They're getting them to do this because they're desperate. And they have to have some sort of a victory. They can't end the war unless they have a victory of some kind. As a modern-day American separated by culture and multiple decades, it's still hard for me to fathom this. And I think the movie really helps to put that into perspective and do it by showing us someone who couldn't go through with it. And for what I understand, this is one of the things that makes the war a hot button topic. Even to this day, this is still a little bit controversial because it's often interpreted as this hyper-nationalist thing that was done. You know, that all of these pilots were these zealots, these fanatics, when a lot of them weren't that way at all.
There was arm twisting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think anything is more complicated than that. Than this kind of like, we're all in this to be extremists, essentially. And that's rarely ever how it is. It's a generalization. So,
yeah. So, like I said, there's a lot. I found a lot of really interesting information about this. I highly recommend everybody check out the show notes and find the sources, read up on this. I really think it will enhance your appreciation of what -1 does and of Shikishima and his story in this film. So, I suppose with that, we can start wrapping things up.
absolutely.
Well, that was a heck of an episode. I was not exactly expecting this to go this long, but I'm glad you stuck it out with me.
Absolutely.
I heard tale of actually when we started, you were like, "Oh no, there's no way I can go this long." Well, you did.
We're almost there.
We're almost there. Yeah, we do need to end. The peanut gallery keeps checking our broadcast time as if that means anything. But now we need to say thank you to a handful of people for the final time here on the Monster Island Film Vault. This is the coda for our season 3. It's now time for the Patreon shout-outs. Travis Alexander,
Danny DeMana,
Damon Noyes,
The Cellcast.
Eric Anderson.
Ted Williams.
Ninja the Ninja.
Brad Batman Edelman.
Christopher Reiner.
The Indiscreet One.
Jake Hambrick.
Edwin Gonzalez.
Matt Walsh, but not that Matt Walsh.
Jonathan Cartwright, but not the general from Star Trek who betrayed everyone.
Tofu Fury. Go. Are you going Super Saiyan right now?
Nothing happened.
I was going to say, but you are redder than Baragon right now.
And I need to change my pants.
I'm not going to ask why. Anyway, we should probably wrap things up before, things get a little too out of hand.
Too smelly.
Yeah, exactly, Jimmy. Yeah, we're not picking up your laundry. I'm just saying. Yeah.
But you're picking up my laundry, Jimmy.
Oh, great. Now who needs a room? Anyway, quick, just to let you know really quick, like I said, this is the coda for Season 3. Our next episode, we are launching Season 4, the Monster Island World Tour, where we will be talking about kaiju films made anywhere but Japan and America, starting with, I don't care what anyone says, they might say this doesn't count, but Super Inframan. And we'll be bringing on our friend Danny DeManna for that one. And then we're going to be getting to our first Godzilla Redux of Season 4. It'll be Son of Godzilla with Neil Reeby.
There we go.
Who I can tell you, looking at the schedule, Neil's going to be showing up a lot. Which I guess makes sense. Neil basically said, if there's ever a Godzilla movie where I don't have someone, he volunteers as tribute. He doesn't care which one. He's just like, I just want to talk about Godzilla.
Fair.
Yeah, fair. Very fair. All right, and now we come to the all-important Jack. Shameless self-promotion! So, what do you got for us?
Well, you can find me, Jack, GMan Hudgens, at GMan a Mysterioid on Twitter. You can also find my old show, Deferential I'm sorry. You can also find my old show, The Drift Space. We are on an indefinite hiatus, but, who knows? We may come back one of these days. I'm never
Please
saying...
do. I miss it.
Yeah, I'm never saying no to that, but you can check out The Drift Space at The Drift Space on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you can check out some of my articles on Deferential Wrath of a Wrestling Markalite Canon.
Which is real.
Which is real. You can check that out on markalite.substack.com.
All right. And, just to let everybody know... you can also check out my author website, nathanjsmarchand.com. I've got a new short story anthology I've contributed to. It's coming out. It's called A Time for Everything, which is all time travel short stories inspired by Ecclesiastes 3. Mine is called A Time to Dance. And then you can also check out my other shows, Henshin Men, which is about Henshin hero television and occasionally movies. And also, even though it just wrapped up, but I know you love it, The Power Trip, a journey through the Power Rangers franchise with my co-host Michael Hamilton. I'm going to miss that show. I really am. Some of the finest work I've done as a podcaster, I have to say.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm also a frequent cast member for Scyther Podcast. You can hear me on Power Rangers, the audio drama. I just joined the X-Men audio drama. And hopefully soon, you will be able to hear me on Avengers, the audio drama, where I will be Johnny Storm, baby.
And not Deadpool?
No, Deadpool. I'm Deadpool on the X-Men show.
Oh, that's right. Gotcha.
All right. Well, we've been at this for a while. We could use some rest, I think.
Yeah.
So let's go relax a little bit here on the island. So, Jimmy, cue the credits. Thank you for listening to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast produced and hosted by Nate Marchand. If you want to join the discussion and be heard on the show, we'd love to hear from you. So email us at feedback@monsterislandfilmvault.com. Our website is monsterislandfilmvault.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Monster Island Film Vault, and on Twitter, where our handle is @TheMonsterIsla1. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, and TikTok. Follow Jimmy from NASA on Twitter at NASAJimmy, and our many other colorful characters using the links in the show notes. The podcast logo was created by Tyler Souls from TylerDrawsComics.com. Our theme song is Wanderer on the Offensive, live edit by B33J, Sarax, Juan Madrano, and Nonsensical Lexus, which is a remix of Counterattack Battle with the Colossus and The Opened Way Battle with the Colossus by Kootani from the video game Shadow of the Colossus. All film and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended or implied. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and or Podchaser to spread the word about the show. You can also support us by joining MIFV Max on Patreon. The Monster Island Film Vault is a Moonlighting Ninjas media production. Sayonara!